stand for the... Beautiful. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll begin the meeting with a moment of silence. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded and televised by the local cable company. I would like a motion to approve bill and payroll warrants. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. And I'd like a motion to accept correspondence in the read file. So moved. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Approval of meeting minutes, open session June 8th, 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Open session June 15th, 2021. Selectman LaMartina was not present. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. And one abstention. And the open session on June 22nd, 2021, I was not present. Is there a motion? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And I'll abstain. And now comes time for the promotional ceremony related to the Whitman Fire Department. It gives me great pleasure to turn the meeting over to our town clerk for the swearing-in ceremony for incoming Fire Chief Timothy Clancy.
How are you? Good. I'm very proud to be standing here with you. We've worked together for a long, long time. Hopefully, not me for many more years, but you, hopefully, you got a lot of years ahead of you. Okay, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Timothy J. Clancy, Jr.
I, Timothy J. Clancy, Jr.
Do solemnly swear and affirm
Do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully and impartially
that I will faithfully and impartially
discharge and perform
discharge and perform
the duties incumbent upon me
the duties incumbent upon me
as the Fire Chief in the town of Whitman
as the Fire Chief in the town of Whitman
in good faith
in good faith
and to the best of my ability.
and to the best of my ability.
I, Timothy J. Clancy, Jr.,
I, Timothy J. Clancy, Jr.
promise to impart my professional
I promise to impart my professional
standards
standards
of quality and integrity
of quality and integrity
so that the conduct of my affairs
the conduct of my affairs
of my office
of my office
shall be above reproach
shall be above reproach
and merit public confidence
and merit public confidence
in the position of Fire Chief.
in the position of Fire Chief.
I, Timothy J. Clancy, Jr.,
I, Timothy J. Clancy, Jr.
promise to uphold the Constitution of the United States,
promise to uphold the Constitution of the United States,
the laws of the Commonwealth,
the laws of the Commonwealth,
and the bylaws of the town of Whitman,
and the bylaws of the town of Whitman.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Chief. Now Danielle and Kylie are gonna pin the badge.
Congratulations, Chief.
I'm also happy to announce that at the executive session prior to this meeting, the Board of Selectmen okayed, they approved and signed a contract with the chief, and the chief signed the contract, so everything is legal. And we're about to go into a number of years with another Tim, as we have to find the fourth Tim at some point. That'll be a job for the next number of years. We have on the Selectmen, we're going to be retiring to the Selectmen's office upstairs in a couple of minutes. We have some other business this evening. We're going to be interviewing candidates who wish to take a school committee seat that's been made vacant. One of the members of a Whitman member of the Whitman-Hanson School Committee, as many of you know, has resigned. And we have 5 people who have expressed an interest in that position, and we'll be interviewing them upstairs in our room shortly, within 5 minutes or so. We'll be doing them in alphabetical order, and we're going to request that the people who are not being interviewed, if they were not in the room at the time that the interview is happening. So that's what we're going to be doing in a couple of minutes. And I think it's time for us to move upstairs and to get on with that business. I'd like to invite all of you to be there, but there's really not enough room. And you can hang out here as long as you'd like, and talk to the chief and talk to each other and enjoy the rest of the night. Thank you very much for coming. School committee member to the Whitman-Hanson Regional School Committee. We're going to interview 5 people this evening. And Six.
6.
My mistake. 6 people. And at the end of it, we'll have a vote, and hopefully someone will emerge with the position. We're going to interview people in alphabetical order. And I think it makes some sense to have the people that are not being interviewed not be here while the interviews are going on. So we'll start off with Heather Clough, and then, who is Heather Clough? Are you Heather Clough? Heather. Yeah. Heather, if you could find Sean when you finish. Okay. And then Sean, do the same for Sandy. And then Beth, I don't see Beth.
That's Beth, I don't see her.
Okay. Well, anyway, we'll go from there. And Ryan? Yes. Ryan Tressel?
Yep.
James Tressel's.
I am James Tressel's son, the one and only.
Full disclosure: I've known Ryan's father for a gazillion years. I was working at Massasoit when he came there a long time ago and started the solar energy program, and since then he's also been a teacher, and didn't know Ryan, but I knew his father. That doesn't disqualify me from working on this committee, that I knew his father. Okay, I have one question to ask of school committee people. Do you want to ask your questions first? It would make some sense to me if you did, actually. Sure. You know, this is your committee. So if you have any order that you'd like to ask them in, I'll honor that. Do we just go around like this?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, that's what we'll do then. And then we'll ask our questions, unless you have exhausted all of the possible questions. Okay, Heather, you're on. I do get to ask the first question, though. So when the other people vacate, is the finance committee room open?
They are
They're
meeting.
meeting,
They're
actually, right
meeting.
now.
Well, so they're just
shortly.
going to hang out in the
He's the
corridor, I
historical
guess.
room. That's it.
Okay. Heather, welcome.
Hi.
We've all read your materials, and we know that you've been interested in this position for a long time because you ran for it. I'd like to ask you an opening question. I get to ask the easiest question, actually. Even though we're familiar with what you've done and what you'd like to do, if you could please, in a few minutes, tell us why we should choose you to be the next school committee member at Whitman Hanson rather than anybody else. What is it about you that makes you the best candidate?
All right, no pressure. So I grew up in Whitman. I'm familiar with the schools. I have fond memories of them. And now as a parent, I wouldn't choose anywhere else for my son to live and go to school. But we can always improve on everything. We can always improve grades. We can always improve student morale, which is important because you need to make sure that the kids buy in to what they're learning. And finding out how to get every student engaged is the ultimate way to bring grades and test scores up across the board. So as a kid, I was diagnosed with ADHD, so I'm familiar with the special education process from multiple levels. And I have to say, it was wonderful and supportive from beginning to end. I loved having my input towards what classes I could take and what classes I thought I could not handle. And now with technology, we have the opportunity to give more students the opportunity to get actual grades and still have in classes that they like without necessarily taking away from classes they may need remediation in as well. So my son struggled when he was younger because he has multiple disabilities. He's autistic and he has a disorder called DMDD, which it's disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Yeah, tongue twister. So a lot of his behaviors weren't treated at the source. They were treated as a disruptive behavior. They didn't address the source of it. But that goes for all kids if you think about it, especially coming back from a pandemic when things are so different. I mean, how many people have lost loved ones, family members, haven't seen their grandparents in over a year and a half now, or possibly don't even have that connection anymore? How many people have lost jobs? And we have to look at students from a whole student perspective, not just the end point, in my opinion. Yes, successful MCAS grades are great, and successful students graduating high school and going on to college is important, but making that student who's having trouble at home or might not fit in with his or her classmates because either of a disability or just because they're the new kid or because kids are quirky and they don't get along for other reasons, but making everyone feel welcome is important because it actually makes it better for everyone. When you're inclusive of those who are disabled from a young age, there isn't as much of a stigma as if, you hadn't seen a child in a wheelchair until you were in high school. You'd be like, oh, that's different. But inclusion from a young age is important, which is why thinking outside the box and using what I've learned through different trainings with like the Federation for Children with Special Needs, I think we can create a more supportive environment for all of the students across the district.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you for throwing your name in the ring, so to speak. Can you speak to any experience that you've had on any other committees or boards and some of your experiences from them, if so?
Yes, because it was so long ago, I didn't include that I went to Plymouth State University part-time for a few years. I didn't finish my degree because I was having some medical issues, and that's a whole different story. So I did leave it off of my resume because it's harder to explain, and it looks like I didn't want to put an asterisk and be like, I promise I didn't drop out because I was lazy. I had medical issues and it became too much. But during that time, I served on a couple of student councils, including the local youth council, which paired up college students with the local at-risk youth, the middle school and high school aged kids, to help with homework and be almost peer mentors for them.
I have two questions. The first one's a three-part question.
Oh, geez.
Promise it's not hard. Relating to the budget, could you describe your understanding of the budget process?
Yes. So the foundation budget is given to us by the state, and it is in several pieces and based on what the contributions are. So the several pieces are determined by how much outgoing costs there are, which are divided by pupil amount in order to get the base foundation. And then from there, they use what the property wealth and the income wealth is to determine, along with a math formula that I don't know off the top of my head, to determine what the local minimum contribution should be based on local wealth and growth over the year compared to the year prior.
What I was asking was the process. In other words,
Well-
what Whitman Hanson
All right.
does.
So
And what
after
is
we
the
get
process?
after we get that, we see what we need filled, what we want filled, and how we can make that happen through conversation, through voting, through discussions.
Can you describe your understanding of the key events or the timeline of the budget process?
I know it's not necessarily a short process. I know it's multiple meetings. I'm not intimately familiar with it as other people, but obviously I'm willing to learn.
If the request that ends up coming out of administration is higher than the town's allotment of what they've set aside, it's been called 5% increase to the assessment, is where they pencil in supposedly the red mark.
Right.
What would your feelings be, or what would you do?
I would look at what has flexibility. And I know that the administration would say there's no flexibility, but if you look at flexibility and see if you can make things work, it's important. But sometimes you just have to realize that some things aren't always attainable when you want them. And you can possibly, depending on what it is, partially implement it with the plan to go forward and continue implementing something the next year, turn it into a process as opposed to a full payment at once.
And last but not least, since that answers that first part, what is your understanding of the charge or the responsibility of a school committee member? What is your charge? What are you there for?
To keep students moving forward with progress and to balance student progress, wants, and in effect needs with technology and everything, especially nowadays, and balance that with what taxpayers can and want to pay.
Thank you.
Dawn.
I'm going to read my question so I maintain the same question throughout all the
All right.
candidates. The Education Reform Act of 1993 created Chapter 70 state aid and a funding formula which uses an aggregate model intended to allow every school district to achieve comparable funding levels without overburdening taxpayers. Not applying the Chapter 70 statutory assessment method as it was intended has resulted in our children receiving an education funded at the lowest common denominator of Whitman and Hanson taxpayer funds. At one point, sinking the district per pupil expenditure to an all-time low of 316 out of 323 Massachusetts school districts in 2016. Will you recognize the correction that needs to be made, and please describe how you will help bring perpetual investment in children's education back in line with the state average?
All right. Of course, I recognize that things have been changed because of non-compliance with the law and such. However, I would not vote to cut the budget below what it truly needs to be for our students to be right what they should deserve. So if we can afford to fund something, I don't see reason not to actually fund it. If it means finagling things elsewhere. It means finagling things elsewhere. I'm not saying, rob Peter to pay Paul, but if we can afford, say, 10, I won't vote to pay for 5. If there's not a concrete reason for it, I will look into every, detail before making a decision like that.
All right, could you tell me a vote that the school committee has taken that you've supported and why? And then could you also tell me a vote the school committee has taken that you didn't support and why?
Oh, geez. Put me on the spot there. So, when it came down to earlier this year, after the budget had been finalized and going in and changing it, I did not agree with it because I thought the funding was being used improperly. The ESSER funds are not supposed to take away from normal, regular, everyday expenses. They're not supposed to be used for those expenses. They're supposed to be used in addition to the expenses for how I have read what has been provided to me by the state about that. And as for things that I've agreed with most of the things the school committee does. It really just, I can't think of one off the top of my head that I've been yay cheering for, but yes.
Thank you.
People often get asked a lot about their strengths, their experiences. What are some things that, and without trying to use the word weakness, do you think you have that you would need to work on in any professional aspect, especially on a school committee?
Well, public speaking, honestly. It's not a strong point of mine, if you couldn't tell by the fact that I keep tripping over my tongue. It's just because I'm not used to it. And I do work well as with a group of people, but working one-on-one with others, I'm not necessarily the most consistent, I'll be honest. But now that things have settled down in my life and are going well and, my son is in a stable place and he is happy, I'm not having to worry about that so much. And like I said, I'm always willing to learn, and there's never a reason to stop learning.
Okay. Randy?
I had a budget question.
By the way, your public speaking is fine.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
I'm a bit out of practice.
I will yield my time.
Justin?
Pass this over to her. So at the last school committee meeting, the 9 current members of the school committee were asked to prioritize the strategic plan working group areas of focus they'd like to work on for the summer. I'd like to give you the same opportunity. In front of you now is the list that they chose from. Could you just choose your top 3 areas of focus, ranked 1, 2, and 3?
1 being the most important, obviously?
Yeah, most important.
So I would say, number 1, I would choose the robust K-8 related arts, including foreign language, because science has shown, along with multiple studies, that students who have a strong related arts background do better with test scores and the morale is happier. Early childhood, for pretty much the same reason. And the next one, I would say the support staff and needs, because like I said before, as we're coming back from an unprecedented time, we're going to have additional needs, and students who didn't have needs before are going to need extra help. So I think looking into making sure all the students who will have needs have those needs met is very important.
Thank you.
Do you want me to pass this back, or?
Sure.
Okay.
You staying on to it?
You can, yeah.
Hang on, keep going. You all set, Cal? I got a yes or no, a couple of yes or no questions. If you're chosen tonight, are you planning on running for re-election?
Yes.
What is probably the most important reason that convinced you to put your name in the running for tonight's choice?
The number 1 reason, well, for running overall is because I love working with kids and I love doing what I can to help them improve their lives. But tonight specifically because I feel like the voters spoke and that the position, I believe that the voters speaking by voting me only 8 votes fewer than Fred in the last election says that the will of the voters also would like me here as well.
And curious, why haven't you run in the past for school committee other than the last election?
Like I said, things weren't stable with my son, and once we got him into a school that actually can help him wonderfully and seeing him improve in leaps and bounds and become more comfortable and more consistent and have less emotional difficulties, I can dedicate more of my time to helping others as well.
And do you have any conflict of interest issues that would cause you to have to abstain from voting on any school committee issue?
None that I can think of.
Good. And I guess my final question, you probably answered already, but what makes you our number one choice to be chosen?
Part of me wants to answer because I'm me, but I will do everything in my power to do what's right for the students in Whitman and obviously Hanson as well, to make them smarter, better, and happier.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you for running. I appreciate it. We need more people to be involved. I have one question, and it sometimes could be an uncomfortable question. There's an awful lot in the news today about critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
And right now Massachusetts is not pushing that, but it's everywhere. It's on the news, it's on the radio, it's everywhere. And I would just like you to briefly give us your opinion on would you support or not support something like that if it ever came before the committee?
I would need to look at what curriculum they would put forth. Like with anything like that, I would expect the same. I'd want to look at what they want to teach. But so much from what I understand, because I had a feeling that would be one of the questions after the protests at a couple of school committee meetings down in other states. A lot of people seem to misunderstand and put a scary label on what people are saying is critical race theory, when it really just means teaching the whole history instead of just from one perspective. We do a lot of that here, especially with like the Native Americans and like the first Thanksgiving. The more that I've gotten friends in other states, the more I've realized that we teach it from a more rounded perspective. And teaching that, applying that same thought process to anything and like critical race theory, talking about more of, say, the civil rights struggles and more, I'll use an example that a friend of mine shared with me the other day. So soldiers who fought in World War II came back and everyone's like, oh yeah, the GI Bill, they get to go to college and they get to do this, but in reality that was only available to the white soldiers. And we weren't taught that in school. And it couldn't hurt to teach students that yes, we were wrong and we're trying to do better, because that also teaches students to have confidence in being wrong. Because if you can look back and go, hey, we did this and we did it wrong and we're trying to be better people about it because now we know or we understand or we have more empathy, what have you, we're trying to do better for everyone. It's kind of important. But along with that, our district really isn't that diverse. So celebrating diversity is important in order to guarantee that students grow up to be open-minded and not have a negative worldview of people who don't necessarily look or think like them.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. Thank you.
Okay, do you have any questions of us?
Not that I can really think of.
Okay, Heather, thank you very much for coming forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
You got one more job, remember? Oh, thank you. Yes,
Okay.
yes. A familiar face.
Good evening, Sean. Sean, welcome. I have the pleasure of asking the first question. It's one of those, simple, wide-open kinds of questions. We've seen your material, we've seen your letter, and so we have some, and we've also seen you a number of times over the years. So we have a pretty good idea of what you've done and where you're coming from. What I would like to ask you, though, is for you to tell us why we should choose you as the best candidate for filling the vacancy. What is there about you?
Well, I think, Mr. Trotter is, I think he's, to compare myself to Mr. Trotter is hard. I'll just put it that way. And Ms. Stafford, I think, is extremely qualified, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for both of them. I don't know the other candidates as well, but I think that what would make myself unique is probably what I wrote in the cover letter. Like specifically the focus that I have, the budget process for me has become this isn't a recent, in the last month, I'm kind of interested in the budget. For the last, 6 years or so, I've kind of pretty seriously tried to take an interest in best practices pertaining to the budget. And for me, I spend my life working with kids who are at risk. The social emotional aspect of education for me is the number one priority, without question, professionally. But I think if I had to choose, watching the school committee meeting and listening to some of the priorities that were recently discussed, I like all three that were chosen, the technology and the related arts and what was the third one? I don't remember, but it was all good stuff, things that I think I happily support, and I think the strategic plan is something that I can really stand behind. But if I had to choose between one of those three and the budget process, I would choose the budget process. I feel like going through the experiences that we've gone through over the last so many budget cycles, we can see that despite anybody's best efforts as far as supporting education or priority in education, if you don't have the budget process in line to support you, then things kind of fall apart. So I've kind of moved in the learning curve that I've gone through as far as paying attention to municipal budgets and whatnot is moving away from the tunnel vision of this is what I support in this narrow field of the department, and education, to a broad understanding of the budget, which is more complex. But if you can do that, if you can implement best practices pertaining to the budget, then it's kind of like a rising tide raises all boats. It's kind of like the foundation for the strategic plan. It helps fund all the other strategic priorities. I mean, it's an argument that makes me unique.
Okay, thank you. The school committee members are going to ask their questions first, and then the selectmen, because it's the school committee place that we're filling, and so they are rowing the boat. Chris.
Thanks, Sean. My question is, I know you mentioned the finance committee, but can you give us any other committees that you've been a part of and what your experiences have been, things you might have enjoyed, not enjoyed, things like that?
Not formally. I was formally part of the finance committee, and that was great. It was a good learning process. But I spent a lot of time, reviewing committees, actively writing about committees and what committees are doing, which isn't very easy to do, actually. I almost deliberately do it to force myself to kind of learn from the school committee or the Board of Selectmen, attend a lot of Board of Selectmen meetings so I can literally with the intent of learning, and then kind of thinking like I need to not just learn from the finance committee, but also from specifically those three and in both towns, really. The last couple of years I've been trying to spend more time watching the Hanson Board of Selectmen meeting and the Hanson Finance Committee meetings when they're available. So I feel like that broad perspective is a bit more difficult and time consuming, obviously. My wife would give me a hard time sometimes. But I do think having a broad perspective about the budget is helpful then when you go back to the specific committee that you're going to sit on.
My wife gives me a hard time sometimes too. First one's a three-part question. Your understanding of the budget process. You could describe that.
Well, for me, I feel like the budget process is, the best practices pertaining to the budget process that I support are those that are really proactive and ongoing. So one that doesn't say like begin and then end, but one that, you know, starts over and is always thinking to the future. So planting seeds now that really might not come to fruition until 5 years from now or 6 years from now, having that kind of perspective and the ability to implement budget policy. I feel like budget policy is something that is hard to implement, but when you do, it does not bind, but it seems to develop the infrastructure that you need so that all parties involved have a clear understanding of what's expected of them, so then communication can be kind of streamlined, so then you can take those steps to make those proactive as opposed to reactive steps pertaining to the budget. So I'm glad that we're meeting in the summer, talking about those strategic priorities now, thinking about how what we can do today is going to help us in October, November, when we're going to have those meetings with finance committees in Whitman and Hanson, and those listening to those committees. They like when people have their ducks in a row. They want people who not only just have their ask, but have a strategic rationale as to why they need those things. So that's a lot of hard work if you can be upfront about, listen, 3 years ago we thought about this and we've been putting money into stabilization for the last 3 years, and it's been on the matrix for the last 3 years. This year we're going to ask you for that, and then if you've been through the last 3 budget cycles with those finance committee members and they have seen you talk about it, then when you finally ask for it, it feels like we knew it was coming, you know, and they've been putting money into stabilization, or they've been working with us to put money into stabilization, you know. So those are the budget practices that I feel like are difficult to implement, but when they are, I think seem to be very efficient and effective.
You name the key events and the timeline of the budget process for us.
Well, the proactive stuff that you do in the planning in the summer and the early fall, I think would be a big part of the budget process. You mean even as specific as like the things that you do with like the committee for, you know, all the capital stuff. So building out your capital plan so that when you do have your specific meetings with, if I'm narrowing it down a little bit and you're talking specifically about the school committee, the school committee is going to talk about their budget priorities early in the cycle, and then they're going to meet with specific stakeholders sometime in the fall, and then they're going to specifically vote on a budget sometime ideally in, you know, late January or early February, depending on when the state budget and cherry sheets and all that kind of stuff comes out, and then working with the towns to usually go through a round or two of, you know, making sure everybody's on board and streamlining and working together, and then formally presenting the budget at town meeting.
And if the administration's request is higher than the town's allotted number, and we've heard a lot about, you know, the 5% increase of the assessment as the magic line.
Yeah.
What would you do?
I don't think it's such a simple question, because I think the 5% number is a really good placeholder. That's what we should shoot for. I think if there is an understanding from a broad perspective, as like we don't have some of the critical things that we need to implement. So right now, we have to get to a point where we can increase services, but that doesn't necessarily mean increase budget, if that makes sense. Enrollment, I think, is a critical issue that would need to be considered. If our enrollment is decreasing, for instance, but we do still want to increase services, how do we adapt the budget to make that happen? You know, that takes a lot of, you know, maybe some hard answers and some hard questions, and it's kind of complex. It's very easy to say, we're just going to increase the budget 5%. Well, I think it needs to be much more precise than that. So a lot of moving parts. I think for us, our community right now, with a focus that and an understanding that there are critical parts that we don't have that we do want to implement foreign language, full day K, that kind of stuff. So.
And last but not least, what is your understanding of the charge or responsibility of a school committee member?
Well, I don't know that it's far from the mission of the strategic plan to implement a high-quality education for all kids. I think it's a pretty strong charge for the school and the school committee. However, I think a school committee member is placed there to represent the people who vote them in. You know what I mean? And that isn't just the kids, because maybe this isn't a direct answer to your question, but it is really how I feel about it. If you simply go into the seat and you're thinking with just tunnel vision about just increasing services without any regard for how it's going to affect any other department, and you run into, you're going to have tension. It just practically it's not very effective to work that way. It seems to be much better to to listen to the other departments, to listen to the people, and do some of the strategic things like surveys and that kind of stuff to get a better feel for what is really in the best interest of everybody involved. So the strategic process, I think, is very helpful that way. And then take a step forward together, as opposed to taking up arms against those others who don't agree with you.
Thank you.
Dawn?
Thank you. I'm going to read my question, so it's the same for everyone. The Education Reform Act of 1993 created Chapter 70 state aid and a funding formula which uses an aggregate model intended to allow every school district to achieve comparable funding levels without overburdening taxpayers. Not applying the Chapter 70 statutory assessment method as it was intended has resulted in our children receiving an education funded at the lowest common denominator of Whitman and Hanson taxpayer funds. At one point, sinking the district per pupil expenditure to an all-time low of 316 out of 323 Massachusetts school districts in 2016. The question is, will you recognize the correction that needs to be made? And please describe how you will help bring Perpetual investment in children's education back in line with the state average.
Yeah, good question. I think for me, that's kind of how I ended up with the budget process. As you focus on the budget process as a priority and implement best practices pertaining to the budget, then things like excess, things like the excess levy capacity and things like the statutory method kind of come to surface. And we went through a little bit of tension with all that stuff, but by people looking for best practices and how to implement some of those logistical things, those are the things that surface, so that then you can make your budget more efficient. And then, like I said, almost like a rising tide raises all boats. A good budget process is helpful for everybody. I don't think people intentionally did those things to keep the budget as low as possible. But I think by deliberately searching for and doing research and all the hard work that we've done to implement those things, slowly with time, even though there was some tension, things are getting better. And I think that's how we get to that spot that we ultimately want to get to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What is a vote the school committee has taken in recent years that you are supportive of, and why? And what is a vote the school committee has taken in recent years that you're not supportive of, and why?
Well, I've been at a lot of votes, and I think specifically voting on the budget over the last, I don't think it would be fair to me, honestly, to be so judgmental, even though I've shared a lot of opinions about that. But I don't take this lightly. It's very difficult to sit in the seat, and even though we've had disagreements in the past, anybody who's in this room, I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and it's easy to, looking back, say this should have been done and that shouldn't have been done. It's very difficult to be there and actually raise your hand. That's hard. And, I think people probably know, like, the things that I had supported and the things that I didn't, you know what I mean? But for me, would you want more detail? Do you want me to?
You can provide as much as you want. I mean, that's fine.
I suppose like the votes about the statutory method and the compromise, for me, if I am answering your hard question, I'd say I wish for a bit more of a compromise a little bit longer. That being said, the fact that we are here today where we are, I think that's a good thing. And moving forward seems to be like much less tension coming and much more positive votes. You could feel the last two meetings you guys had was, I felt like really positive and full of optimism, and you can see logistically how that stuff could come to fruition. So I think it's all good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We're a good group, huh? Sean, anyone who's on an interview, you included, will share all their experiences, and you come with a ton, and thank you for all that you do. Being on the appointed member for PAC, Plymouth Area Collaborative, I just can envision everything that you do on a daily basis, so thank you for that. If you had and you don't have to call it a weakness, but if you had to come down to something, you know what I could really improve on, what would that be, or what would those things be?
For me, it was the budget process. Clearly, I'm coming from the school environment. I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching for 21 years, and I take that stuff serious. You know, so I'm a better teacher today than I was last year. I constantly push myself to get better in my profession, which I'm not saying there's not too many people who go into alternative ed, you know, the room that nobody else wants to teach in, and go there willingly and then stay. Oftentimes they go there so that they can get the real history position or they can get the real math position. For me, that's exactly where I want to be, and I take it serious, you know, so I try to keep getting better. For me, the clear weakness was the budget. I needed to know more about the budget because that wasn't my background, you know, so that's specifically why I've spent so much time working on it.
Thank you.
I have crafted a new question since Mr. Small originally took mine.
Sorry.
So I will ask this for the remaining candidates. What we see is basically, the way I look at it, is it seems that the budget between the town's ability to pay and the superintendent's ask runs on a parallel path almost until we get to sometime in April and it comes to a chaotic collision. What would you do to streamline that process?
I think I keep going back to policy. I recommended that at the recent school committee meeting when they were asking for priorities. This is actually before I was going to run for school committee. I sent an email. I said, I think one of the things that they should consider is specifically adding to the fifth hallmark of the current strategic plan, that they add nuts and bolts about the budget process, because I'm not saying that's the right policy. You know, I referenced another district, but implementing some sort of policy so that all stakeholders have a clear expectation about what's to be expected throughout the budget process helps things stay proactive. I know that can be difficult to do, but at least I think it's a priority and something to move towards. If you can make it more proactive and you can get people on the same page as early as possible in the budget process, and you make clear like the obvious struggles that you have. So it wouldn't work if you only did it in one department, but if you have done all that work also in all other departments, so that people from the school committee can also see, like, geez, look at what the DPW needs, a lot, you know, and look at what the fire department has gone through, and look at how much we need to fund. So there's some commonalities about what you expect for people. Then you have multiple towns doing it, you know. So now in a region, I feel like some people would say, well, see, it's almost impossible, so we really shouldn't do that. But I go the other side. I think because we really do need to coordinate with both towns and multiple departments and all that kind of stuff. Starting to coordinate that process is very helpful, so it can happen as early in the process as possible. I think the financial forecast a financial forecast or a relatively accurate financial forecast from all parties involved helps all of that.
I think you're going to like my question. You keep bringing up the last couple school committee meetings. At the last school committee meeting, the 9 current members of the school committee were able to vote on their priorities to work on for the strategic plan, work areas of focus. Just like to give you the same opportunity that Chris just passed you the list of their final topics. Can you just rank your top 3 priorities?
Yeah, again, I don't need to keep hopping on it, but they chose, the early childhood, the robust K-8, and the student technology. I think each of those, remember for me, my number 1 priority would be the social emotional. I think that's where I would focus. But each of those really does overlay with the social emotional. Investing in technology is really helpful for kids who struggle with their social emotional needs. Same thing with robust related arts, music and art, and all those things are really helpful for kids who struggle with social emotional stuff, and also the early childhood. Yeah, I could go on forever about how that's helpful about identifying kids who struggle with social emotional needs, and identifying kids early is very good for kids and services, but also good for money. So I'm a fan of all 3, but again, if I had to choose, I would focus on the budget.
Thanks.
Daniel.
Okay. I have a few questions. First of all, if you are chosen tonight, do you plan to run for re-election?
I do.
Good, thank you. What is your most important reason that convinced you to put your name in for the running for tonight?
Again, I really did have to think about it because it's a big deal to sit on the school committee. You do hold a whole lot of weight. 9 people sat around and brainstormed this, and then 3 were chosen, and those will be the 3 that they kind of focus on moving forward. I think of all the teachers in the district and all the voices that all the input that they would like to have, and they do throughout the administrative hierarchy, but that 9 people and then 10 will have such a big impact on kids. People should pause before they think about taking this role. But I think I think we've seen some improvements, even hiring Mr. Heineman. I referenced that in my cover letter. Investing in people who care about those things, who then have the expertise to implement those things, you can just feel how that's just going to help. So voicing some of my arguments, positive arguments, hopefully, with the committee, I think will be helpful. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it really could help. So.
Thank you. Do you have any conflict of interest that would cause you to abstain from voting on any issue during a school committee meeting?
Sometimes, yeah, because my wife is in the district, so I would follow closely with whatever the leadership says as far as, this is a vote that is okay to vote on, this is a vote that you can't, so.
And why haven't you run in the past for school committee?
Well, I think specifically why I haven't run in the past is because I wanted to learn and play a bit more of an active citizenship role outside of a committee over the last couple of years. I've shared my writing often, which is very difficult to do, again, because you're putting yourself out there for a whole lot of criticism. And honestly, one of the things that I thought was, if I could develop an argument that was difficult to, not to disagree with, but again, there are certain arguments that I think all people kind of agreed with, and that's kind of where I've landed. And that's not by accident. I think getting feedback from all aspects of people who are concerned has been very helpful, so.
Okay. And what makes you, this is your time to spout, what makes you our number 1 choice to be chosen? What's special about yourself?
Maybe if my kind of arguments overlap with what you're interested in, I think that would be helpful. If it does feel like on the committee that would just cause a whole lot more tension, then maybe that I wouldn't be the best candidate. But if some of the things that I am interested in is something that you think could have the committee, then for those people who are going to vote, I would really appreciate your vote.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Brian.
First off, I want to thank you for putting your name out there and being involved. It's great when we have as many people from the town get involved in town government, because we clearly have many vacancies on boards all the time, so I appreciate you coming forward. You spoke of earlier about difficult discussions. So in the news, and it's on the radio and TV, it's everywhere about critical race theory. I just would like, a brief idea where you land on that. I know it's a difficult subject. People get crazy sometimes when they hear different perspectives, but I'd just like to hear what your opinion is on that.
Me, coming from education and something so serious, I don't agree with the school district implementing anything that's perceived to be like highly politicized and diversive and all that kind of stuff. But the history department at the high school is extremely knowledgeable. Mr. Davison, I have a lot of respect for a lot of those teachers. As a committee member, I would depend on the administration and the history department to really give a feel, give more feedback specifically on the content that they're currently teaching and the curriculum, because I think their feedback is really what would, give me some. I can give like a general idea, but I think as a committee member, one of the things that I'm going to try and really push for is to be thorough, to pay attention to the people who are in place, who are making the decisions on the ground and the hierarchy up, and listening carefully to their voices. But knowing the history department, I think they're pretty, sound, solid, thorough. So
I appreciate your honesty on that. Thank you.
Sean, thank you very much. Do you have any questions of us?
No, I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean.
Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
We agreed as a committee to ask the same questions of all candidates.
Yes.
And Mr. Kane had an opportunity to answer 2 more questions than Mrs. Clough was able to.
What were the 2 other questions? Randy's question.
Yes, Randy. And Mr. Small asked, what is the charge of a school committee member?
He asked that of.
I asked that of Heather.
He asked that of Heather.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, he did.
Just Randy passed on.
Because Fred took his question.
Okay.
I don't know which one it was, but it was the best and the good one.
It's like the firing squad.
Heather, the question that Randy asked.
We're not that bad.
You're not that bad? Okay, great. Good to know.
But I said I would ask the same question to the remaining candidates, so
It was, but I think.
I
Fred had
went
already-
prior. Whichever one of my questions was one that he was going to be asking.
Point those in.
But Mrs. Clough wasn't asked about streamlining the budget process, I believe.
right, because I hadn't formulated the question yet, because 2 seconds prior, Mr. Small basically asked a question along my same lines. So I wasn't going to ask a repetitive question. But I do feel I have the right to. I don't think by her not giving an answer is in any way is that negatively affecting her in this.
Okay, I just didn't
Process.
hear the questions asked of her in the same way, so.
I
I've read my
yielded my
question
time
verbatim.
stating that Mr. Small had asked, I had a budgetary question Mr. Small had asked.
Thank you.
Well, wasn't that fun?
Am I free to go now?
Yeah, Sandy, welcome. I get the honor of asking the first question.
Oh, great.
And it's a usual opening question. We've seen your material, we've seen your letter, we've seen your resume, so we have some idea about where you're coming from, who you are. But if you could, Dan is going to ask this question again later on, because he doesn't
remember my
he doesn't
answer?
understand directions. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you just to tell us why you are the best choice for replacing the retiring, the resigning member of the school committee?
Sure. So I personally feel as though I am the best choice for replacing the school committee member. Both my professional background, long story short, I have a bachelor's degree in business with a minor in accounting. I've worked very hard to get where I am. I grew up very poor. I used to live actually at 62 Park Ave. Long story, but we watched our house get auctioned off as children, and we swore that we would never live like that. And myself, my sister, and my brother and I fought really hard to push ourselves through college while supporting our family. From there, I went on my professional career, and I had 2 children. One is, your normal child that is excelling at the Duval Elementary School, and my other child is special needs, which gives me a unique perspective. I, can see an everyday average child and how they're doing in school and what their needs are. But I also have the position of looking at, the special needs program and, how it's run, maybe changes that could be made or anything like that. So I feel like I have a view of, not just your average everyday school and, the run of the mill, but also, the other side of things.
Okay, thank you. Chris is going to ask the next question.
Thank you for coming and throwing your name in the ring. My question is, can you give us some examples of some other committees or boards you've been on and what your experiences have been, some of the pros, cons, where you tend to work, just trying to get your feel for your experience on committees?
Sure. So as for committees, I haven't been on a whole lot. I've done a lot of volunteer work throughout the years. I am certified as a preschool teacher. Through high school, I became OCCS certified and had to do certain hours through Bright Horizons, the Jewish Community Center, as well as through the years, due to my son's disability, I actually volunteer quite a bit at the places where he goes for private therapies, just to become familiar with, not just how his therapies work, but, what the needs are of him and other children. I myself don't continually volunteer on the sports. I am not a sports person, but my husband is actively involved in the sports community, and he's a coach in Whitman as well.
Hi. 2 questions. First one's a 3-part.
Uh-oh. Do I need to write it down?
I think you'll probably do okay.
Okay.
First part, your understanding of the budget process.
Okay. Like how it works?
You,
Every budget is run differently. For the lack of better understanding, you have your balance sheet, which is a list of assets and liabilities. It is the running total from the start of, we'll say, a business, and is what you would, look at if you were owed or to close a per se business. Then you would also review your P&L. Those would be the first things that I would look at when working towards a budget. Your P&L, as I'm sure most of you know, is your monthly income and expenses, and it only affects the net income reflected on the balance sheet. Does that help a little bit?
I was, and I don't know.
I guess that's kind of
Mr.
broad.
Chair, for clarification, I was referring to, but I did not state, the school budget.
Clarify that.
Okay. To clarify, I'm speaking of the school budget process.
I'm not 100% familiar with the school budget process. That's something I would have to learn. I know more about like a personal for-profit business process, which is what I do for a living.
The second part, with the school budget process in mind, name the key events or the timeline.
The key events of
The timeline of the school budget process.
Again, I'm not familiar with that, so I need to learn that as we go.
Okay, and last but not least, if the request is higher than the town's allotment, as they say there's that magical 5% increase in the assessment, what would you do?
Again, can you repeat that?
If the request, and I apologize if I wasn't clear enough on my question, from administration, is higher than the town's allotment. The town pencils it in for a 5% increase of the prior year's assessment. Okay, what would you do?
Can you give me an example? I'm sorry.
Yeah. The administration says they need 55 million. When they do the whole statutory method, everything comes down.
Okay.
We're looking at 16 million, 5 and change for Whitman, and I forget what the number was for Hanson. but Whitman says, okay, an increase of 5% would put you at 16 million and change.
Okay.
That's what we feel we can afford based upon tax revenue, levy limits, et cetera.
Okay.
So now the administration says, well, we need more than that. So what would your...
Would we be able to go back and review the budget and see if we can pull funding from different allocations? Is that an option?
I want your answers.
Oh, okay, that would be my first question
Okay.
that I would ask, I guess.
Okay. All right, sure. All right, thank you. That's my three-parter. And then last but not least, what is your understanding of the charge or responsibility of a school committee member?
My understanding and responsibility of a school committee member is to advocate for all of the children, whether it be, your atypical or non-atypical child, and ensure that everyone is getting, equal education across, a fair and appropriate education across the board.
Thank you.
I'm going next. We're doing the school committee first. So I'm going to read my question. The Education Reform Act of 1993 created Chapter 70 state aid and a funding formula which uses an aggregate model intended to allow every school district to achieve comparable funding levels without overburdening taxpayers. Not applying the Chapter 70 statutory assessment method as it was intended has resulted in our children receiving an education funded at the lowest common denominator of Whitman and Hanson taxpayer funds. At one point, sinking the district per pupil expenditure to an all-time low of 316 out of 323 Massachusetts school districts in 2016. The question is, will you recognize the correction that needs to be made? And please describe how you will help bring perpetual investment in children's education back in line with the state average.
Okay, so I did a little research on Chapter 70, which will help me, I guess, get my answer to you. From what I understand, Chapter 70 obviously is a major program of state aid that goes to elementary and secondary schools, in addition to providing state aid for operation. So after reviewing that and listening to what you had to say, I think that the people in the past, unfortunately, have failed our kids, and in my opinion, the kids from, I guess, this point going forward, they're our future. In 30 years, they may be one of us on these seats. And I think the solution is pretty simple. You shouldn't cut funding to the school budget. Like I said, these kids are our future, and they could potentially be in one or all of these spots someday.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy, for running. My question is, what is the vote the school committee has taken in recent years that you've been supportive of, and why? And what is the vote the school committee has taken in recent years that you haven't been supportive of, and why?
I think my answer is all in one. It's the full day K. I think that, that did not pass. And I think that that is something not just as a community member, but people potentially moving into Whitman could look at. I think that in the long term, that could actually help the schools and promote a better education. I think some of the kids that are in half-day program, again, in my opinion, maybe their parents can't afford to pay that full day. And if they were able to put the kid in the full-day program, then maybe those parents could, maybe they're living in an apartment, as an example, and could be able to purchase a house in Whitman, which could then in turn, change, their tax implications, and provide more funding to the schools. I think having full day K is something that should be universal. And again, my kids aren't in kindergarten, but I think it's something that, across the state, it's becoming lesser and lesser, and more towns should be implementing full day K.
Thank you.
So you got to say a lot about experiences already and so forth. It's usually a two-part question, but I narrowed it down. If you were to work on something that some people will call it a weakness, but in all my years of being a manager, I try to avoid that word. What would be some of the things, though, that you'd work on to improve?
For the schools?
For yourself,
Myself.
the schools, mostly you.
For me, I think it would be public speaking. I'm not very good at public speaking. Right now, I feel like a deer in the headlights. That's like one of my weaknesses. I think in the school, I think the first thing I personally would like to look at would be special education, Chapter 1 funding, things of that nature, you know, how things are allocated.
You answer that as a really good public speaker. Thank you.
My question is budget-related. As the budget process develops, we seem to see it on a parallel path, and then it kind of comes together in a chaotic mess sometime in April, where we see the town's ability to pay compared to the superintendent's request for services. What would you do to streamline that process?
That's a good question. I would have to look at the budget. If I'm answering your question correctly, you're asking me, sorry.
I guess if you're asking for clarification of the question, I can do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you make a more cohesive development, a more cohesive way to do things
Like the superintendent's looking for
between
more-
town and the school district?
I mean, could there be like a quarterly review, you know, or a quarterly conference to see what's going on, or bi-quarterly or monthly, you know, see where the budget's at, where the funding is, you know, what changes maybe need to be made? Are there, you know, I don't know a lot about the budget for Whitman per se. You know, I don't know if there's, you know, restricted donations, if the district gets restricted donations, or if they could get restricted donations, you know. I don't know if that's something available. I know a lot of nonprofits get a lot of restricted donations that could be restricted for, you know, we'll say special education program or speech or language, you know, and if that's an option, if their budget, you know, issues, I guess that's my answer.
Thank you.
At the last two school committee meetings, the 9 current members of the school committee were asked to develop their areas of focus for strategic workshops over the summer. And last week, they voted their top 3, just giving you the same opportunity that they had to rank your top 3 areas of focus. Chris just passed you the list that they chose from.
Top 3 as in most important?
Most important things you would like to work on as a school committee member over this working group period.
Redistricting by grade configurations. Can someone elaborate a little bit on that? Like what the specifics of that?
Can defer to one of the school committee members if there's a better.
Take that time.
That would be me. That's my idea. It is essentially consolidating all of, for example, the first graders at Conley and Duval and moving them into one of the schools. So perhaps Duval would become all kindergartners, all first grade, and depending on space, maybe all second graders. And Conley would become second, third, fourth grade, or third, fourth, fifth. So it's combining all students and teachers together in one school.
Interesting.
To also assist with equitable class sizes, because then you can average them out more if you have all the first graders in one building.
That's interesting.
Similar to what Hanson used to do, where they had McQuon, kindergarten, first,
Yeah.
second, and Indian had third, fourth, fifth.
Interesting. So it's kind of the same as equitable class size by level, similar. So my first one, which hit me right on the nose, would be the early childhood ed, K through pre-K. That would be the first one that I probably want to look at. The second one would be what she just discussed with me, which I guess goes in line with equitable class size, redistricting by grade level. I'd be interested in looking at numbers and figures for that, taking a deeper dive, I guess. And then I would probably look at support staff and needs.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Got a couple of questions here. First one's yes or no, or quick reason. If chosen tonight, would you plan on rerunning
Yes.
during the election? Thank you. What is your most important reason that would convince us to vote for you? I mean, you know, what made you
You're right.
decide to run?
What made me decide to run was my 2 kids, to be honest with you. Like I said, I have one child that is your normal child who's crushing life, who literally has 2 notes in her file saying she's the model student at Duval. And then I have another child who's special needs. And, 2 different kids, 2 different things. I'm learning a lot about the special education side, but I'm also learning a lot about the general education side. And I think that I could be a good advocate for the parents in the community and really speak out. And work as a team collaboratively with everyone. We all have different views. We all have different opinions. We all need to meet somewhere in the middle for these kids.
Okay. And another question is, do you have any conflict of interest that would cause you to have to abstain from any vote taken on the school committee?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. And, well, I think you've answered the past. My next question was, why haven't you run in the past? And I assume it was dealing with your children.
No, so my husband works for a major airline and was offered to run to a possible relocation. And we were in the process of going through that stage, and he made it to the 4th round of interviews. And then a lot of things didn't come into play, and he didn't take the position.
Okay. And my 5th question, Kyle has already asked it.
So have you, actually, but that's okay. Who's counting? Yeah.
Thank you for running. It's important that we get more people involved in the community, and it's hard sometimes because of our boards and committees sometimes have a lot of vacancies all the time. So to have people involved it's really good. So I thank you for that. And we all have hard decisions and discussions sometimes. And in recent days and weeks on the radio and TV, it's been all over the place on both sides of the equation about critical race theory. And I just briefly would like to know where you stand on how you would go about that should it ever come up to the school committee.
You mean like ever come up in terms of like the curriculum that's being
Yes.
presented in the classroom?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we'd have to look at the curriculum. I mean, there is a reason they call history history. So, I mean, I think we would have to take a look at the curriculum before making a decision. That's how I feel.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, that exhausts the questions of the group. Do you have any questions of us?
I don't, but thank you guys.
Okay.
I don't feel like a deer in the headlights anymore. I'm free.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Did you get that sheet back?
Take
Good luck, guys.
5 minutes. Just take a 5 minute if you want to bring up my question.
I've just been asked if we could take a 5-minute break.
Sure.
So let's take 5 minutes before we bring in Beth Stafford.
I just want to open
Do I
it.
have to unplug my laptop?
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I don't know if you need, if we want to bring Heather back in for my question.
That's stretch.
Hey, Beth.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Last time we were in this room together, you may have been sitting up here.
Yeah, I was.
Beth, thank you for showing interest in this position. The school committee members will be asking you some questions first, and then we'll ask some questions also.
Okay.
And then at the end, if you want to have anything you want to ask us, that'd be fine.
Okay.
But I get to ask the first one,
Oh, lucky
which
me.
is always the easiest one, right?
Okay.
We've seen your resume, we've seen your letter, so we also, some of us know you from the past.
Whether that's good or bad, we're not really sure.
All good. All good. So what I'd like to ask you is, what could you convince us, in a few words, why you're the best choice to take the place of the resigning member?
Sure. Well, as you can see from my resume, I've always been interested in education, and once I retired, I was like kind of feeling out of things and not being in contact and missing out on a lot of the information and, being able to help. I feel I'm a great candidate because of my past experience of being on the school committee and also being a selectman. So I have the fiscal side of me being the selectman and working for the town for 6 years, a couple as chair.
and being being on the school committee as vice chair, that I have that to bring forth during this time, that we need a lot of different sides to look at, I believe, for school committee. There's a lot of information, a lot of impact with the COVID and the follow-up and what's going to happen with that, and with a hopefully new building that we have coming. And I just would really like to get back into education again, and I feel that this is my way to help the town and help the school children.
Great, thank you very much. Chris?
First.
Hey,
Thanks,
Chris.
Beth. You've obviously been on many committees, member associations, boards. My question is, can you give us some of your, say, high points and low points of your experience being on boards, some of your fond memories, some of the challenges, and maybe where you tend to fit in, or maybe, maybe over the years you've changed in your, role on some of these committees, whatever. I'm just trying to get a feel for how you like to work with committees.
Well, it's really with a lot of the committees I was on, and a lot of the things, whether it be educational or for school, for the school or the selectmen. I've been on both sides. I've been management, being selectman, being school committee, but I've also been the employee for a lot of different things. So been able to look at both sides. I think some of the difficulty, we had a lot of difficult situations when I was a selectman. It was, we had some pretty serious ones that were very difficult. I would say those were kind of my low points because it was tough to get through. But I did enjoy every minute that I was there. And some of the hard part, I think, is being a manager and helping out and trying to see both sides. So I think that one of the tough times is when I've had to negotiate as an employee. Those were tougher times because I could speak for myself, but I'm representing a lot of people, not just me. And when I was in Mass Teachers, I was the management, and I had to fight for that side, So I think that's the tough part, and that's the I wouldn't say really low point, but that was probably the harder points that I went through.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, 2 questions. The
Yes,
first
sir.
one's a 3-part.
I have to think. Okay.
First part, your understanding of the budget process.
Yes. Okay, so, well, hopefully the governor gives us some idea what we're going to do. And the administration works for, well, they used to give a wish list. Now they hopefully give a better compact budget that you look over, school committee goes over, asks their questions line by line, hopefully, and makes decisions whether they have to make cuts or transfer or look at what's important first. And then the school committee makes the presentation to the towns for what is good, what is, and speaks for the committee because it's committee of a whole, not one person. And that's what's important.
The key events in that timeline of the budget.
Well, key events. I think one of the most important part is letting the public know what's going on and keeping them informed. To me, that's one of the most difficult, but most important. And that's, to me, one of the key ones, once things have been decided. One of the other key points would be looking at the big picture, what's best for the children in the town, but also what's best for the town and the town people, and that for the budget.
And last but not least, if the request is higher than the town's allotment, and the town seems to have that magic 5% increase of the assessment penciled in this time and age, what would you do?
Well, been in that situation before. I guess we would, again, review everything with the administration and see if there's any changes that can be made. If not, then to me would be to go to the towns and explain the reasons for the increase and why it's necessary, why it's important to the education of the children in this town, why we, the town does a good job, but don't we want to be great?
Thank you. And last but not least, what is your understanding of the charge or responsibility of a school committee member?
Well, school committee member, they're in charge of policy. They are in charge of the hiring, firing of the superintendent. They are to carry forth the wishes of the majority of the committee. And they are to also be fiscally responsible for the town they are representing.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Here. On this side. I'm going to read my question.
Okay.
The Education Reform Act of 1993 created Chapter 70 state aid and a funding formula which uses an aggregate model intended to allow every school district to achieve comparable funding levels without overburdening taxpayers.
Yeah.
Not applying the Chapter 70 statutory assessment method as it was intended has resulted in our children receiving an education funded at the lowest common denominator of Whitman and Hanson taxpayer funds. At one point, sinking the district per pupil expenditure to an all-time low of 316 out of 323 Massachusetts school districts in 2016. The question is, will you recognize the correction that needs to be made? And please describe how you will help bring perpetual investment in children's education back in line with the state average.
Well, absolutely, I think the funding is wrong and needs to be changed, and how we do things in the state needs to be changed. How would I help? I would be talking to the reps and the state senators and try to see what's going on, where are they, at what point are they, and what can they do for us. We need to be really proactive. Actually, it's going to be reactive now. Proactive would have been years ago. Reactive, because we are not getting the funding we need. You can even look at our busing funding. That was supposed to be 100%. I think it was once, which was really, that is really a killer for us. I mean, it's caused a problem with our scheduling of class, grade level times and everything because of money issues. The Chapter 70 needs to be corrected. It's from, like you said, 93. There's a lot of changes to special ed, the costs that have gone through the roof, and that we are responsible for, which we should be, of course. But I think that that's one of the places that really need to be looked at, and still is an argument at the State House.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to say thank you for running. What is a vote the school committee has taken in recent years that you have been supportive of, and why? And what is a vote the school committee has taken in recent years that you haven't been supportive of, and why?
Okay. Can I do the haven't first?
Yeah.
Okay. What I haven't been happy about is the cutting of full-day K from the budget. It is something that I felt I wish it had been done a long time ago when we could have received money from the state to help us and at least give us a start. And that's a problem. I understand the budget, but I just wish things could have been changed. Things could have made different, because now we're between a rock and a hard place as far as I'm concerned with the full-day K. A good decision, I think, working through COVID, I think all of you on the school committee have done a great job. A tough time, a lot of difficult decisions that had to be made, and I thank goodness I'm not teaching anymore with a lot of work that had to be done, but I feel that the votes taken having to do with COVID, I thought were very, very well done. And as a former teacher, I appreciated how things were, the safety of the buildings, the safety of the students and the teachers, and how that was all looked on. I thought it was a great job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
You've listed some tremendous assets, skills, and so forth.
Thank you.
And sometimes you get the question of what's your strength and what's your weakness. I'm going to focus just on weakness. When I use that word, what would Beth want to improve about herself particularly in a school committee member position?
Well, I usually don't have a problem with speaking my opinion, but sometimes I tend to hold back. And I want to no longer do that. I always want to be confident in what I have to say. I think sometimes I try, like even at home today when I was thinking, and I was like, I don't want to say something that sounds foolish. And I want to be honest and say how I feel, no matter who is involved and who is there and who is speaking, and that I might offend somebody or they might disagree with me, that's fine, but I want to be more comfortable with that.
Good. Thank you, Beth.
Randy.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, Randy.
My question is budget related.
Okay.
As the budgets start to develop, we see them running like a parallel path.
Yes.
We have the town budget developing our ability to pay, and the school trying to meet the superintendent's requests. Then they all come together. It's kind of like a collision course in April. And then chaos ensues. What would you do to streamline that process?
Well, what could I do that hasn't been tried? That's, I think, one of the issues. I think, again, we have said it, I've been at the school committee meetings and when it is said, and I think, again, we need to be more proactive, more collaborative right from the get-go, right from the start, so that everybody knows where everybody is going. What are the issues, so that I think that selectmen and the town needs to understand a little bit more of the education part. I think there's not a lot of that, and so I wish there'd be more collaboration with understanding, and that, maybe, I think a lot of the people on the school committee are they live here, so they know what the town finances are, I think. But it's more difficult for somebody to understand, I think, the educational issues. So I think to work together right from the get-go to explain why things are needed. If things are added that the town might be saying, we don't need that, I think right from the start, if that was explained to working together with the townspeople, with the finance committee, with the selectmen, why it's needed, it would be more collaborative in the end of trying to convince the townspeople why it would be needed.
Thank you.
Chris is going to pass you something related to my question.
I can put my glasses on? I'm old.
Sure. Over the last couple of weeks, the school committee has been developing their areas of focus for working groups over the summer.
I saw that.
And the 9 current school committee members were asked to rank their areas of focus. I just wanted to give you the same opportunity. These were the areas of focus they determined at the first meeting. Which would your top 3 be?
Top 3. Well, I think I've already said one. Early childhood is there. Goodness, all of them. I know. Good focus groups, everybody. Trying to think all different ways. The related arts, I would say. And, well, honestly, facility needs. I know that's kind of a strange one, but being at Whitman Middle School for 25 years plus 9 years as a sub, facilities need to be really... I think what everybody needs to understand is when you're working in a place that has, when the children go to open their locker and the whole bank comes off the wall, it's not really conducive to learning. And when your heat shuts off and your room is freezing and the kids are wearing jackets, it's not conducive to learning. So I think that's why I chose that one.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Beth.
Hey, Dan.
Hi. If chosen tonight,
Yes,
would
sir.
you plan on rerunning for re-election?
Yes.
Thank you. What's the most important reason that convinced you to put your name in for the running tonight?
Because I wanted to get back into working with education and with the town again.
Right, and I
I
know,
really
Kyle,
enjoyed that
That's the question you
part.
already asked?
Yeah.
No.
Well, you know, it's the same, I know, the answers are kind of the same, but it's really why, you know, I wanted to do that.
And do you feel that you have any conflict of interest that would cause you to abstain on any type of a vote?
Yes, absolutely, negotiations. I would have to, because as a former teacher, and I get, you know, I have a pension, and I get my health insurance, my dental through school, so I would have to abstain from those votes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
for being
negotiations,
honest.
yes.
And why haven't you run in the past for school committee? You
Oh, well, I did. I already have. I didn't this time because my mom had, well, it was with COVID and everything, and my mom had a little stroke. And I thought that everybody running and did a good job with the COVID, so I didn't really feel it was time, so.
And what makes you our number one choice to be chosen? What makes you think? That was the question. That's the question?
That's the question.
I think Kyle already asked that question, so if you don't feel like answering it.
No, I'll say it again. I think because of my knowledge through the fiscal with the town, being on a selectman, and with my knowledge being on a school committee and being an educator for many years, I think I kind of know both sides of the coin.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for running.
Thank you, Brian.
I appreciate your involvement and the fact that we don't get enough people just to come out and for
I
these
know.
committees.
I was really happy that were a lot of people.
I appreciate your past service.
Thank you.
As Carl said, we know you because when you did not run again, I ran, and I've been here ever since.
God bless you.
And I don't know why, but you've talked about the difficult questions and trying to be more honest and whether it offends people or not. With all this on the radio and TV and all the hubbub about this critical race theory and how maddening it is to hear both sides, I would just like to ask you briefly what your opinion is on this and how, if this became a subject to the committee, what you would think.
Okay, on the critical race theory?
Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding right now about the critical race theory, because the critical race theory is not taught in schools. It's taught in college, or if you're going to be a lawyer, that's where it's taught. So I think there's a lot of misinformation. So that, to me, is going to be the most difficult part, that if that came up that was something that we needed to talk about, that you really need to start with the basics of making everybody understand that teachers are not, and I say that because I read a lot of the Facebook comments and a lot of people saying, oh, you got to not teach that. And it's like, we don't. We don't teach that. It's not taught right now. It's taught with the higher level critical thinking people. So if it comes, I think we have to do a lot of critical thinking of ourselves and what we want. I don't have mixed feelings about it. I have concerns about how it would be introduced at the different levels and what really needs to come out and how it needs to be done. And I think that's what the school committee would really have to look at and follow and make sure that, you don't want certain things being taught at first grade that you would maybe teach at 8th grade or 12th. Right. There's a whole different things. And if it really comes down to how you're going to teach, you also, whatever gets decided by school committee, you need to have your teachers back you up, and understand what your reasons for saying what you're going to say or doing what you're going to do with the critical race theory. There's a lot of great points about critical race theory, and there's a lot of concerns that people have, which I certainly understand. And I know I'm not being really specific to you, but it's kind of difficult because it isn't being taught yet, and people are getting the wrong idea about that whole idea. And it's not, I don't think, blanking out history, it's adding to history is really what it's doing.
Well, I appreciate your honesty, and again, thank you for your past service and all you've done, because resume was great.
Oh, thanks.
Do you have any questions of us, Beth?
No, just did you want us hanging? We're all asking, should we be hanging around or should we leave, and you'll let us know what?
Well, if you want to be here for the vote, yeah. After we've finished the interviews, we'll have to take votes to try to find someone who will reach the number of six votes. So if you want to come in and watch it, I mean, if I were you, I'd probably want to come in and watch the voting.
Okay. All right. What's that?
Go to Peaceful Meadows.
Or I could go there. That'd be more enjoyable right now, because I'm a little nervous. No, I'm a little nervous.
Enough for everybody.
You can go to Peaceful Meadows now and bring us back something before we vote.
Oh, is that it? Ah.
Trying to steal that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, my big job.
That's your big job. I didn't mean to take it
So
away
I
from
have
you,
me asked
Chris.
about-
Didn't mean to take it away from you. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Come on, man.
I figured it would
You are
happen.
taking away my job.
I'm bringing handouts next time.
Right.
They're a good mark.
I didn't want to have to read it every time.
Oh, that's okay.
Smart, very smart.
Would have been screwed if I asked that question.
It's true.
Brian, thank you for applying for this position.
Well, thanks for having all comers. I know that it's some of the bona fides of the people before me are pretty impressive, so I'm glad you are taking all applicants, especially this late into the evening, because it's definitely a long process.
And if you had watched our meeting a couple of weeks ago, all of the people who were here being interviewed, names will be placed in nomination. That's the way it's going to work.
Yep.
So you're perfectly free to stay here and watch us vote you up or down.
Okay.
Depending upon how comfortable you feel with that. Ryan, I get to ask you the first question, and then we're going to turn it over to the school committee to ask some questions, and then the selectmen, the remaining people, the selectmen will ask questions also. But I get to ask the puff question, the easy question. We've seen your materials. We know something about you from what you wrote to us. I have disclosed already that I know your dad, but I don't really know you.
Yep.
But I do know your dad. And question I'm going to ask you is, beyond being Professor Trussell's son, what is it that makes you the best candidate for this position? Why should we vote for you?
I don't know if I think that best is really a good term for it. I mean, like I said, everyone here, I've been talking to them outside. Everybody here is, that step forward is certainly seems to be very capable and dedicated to the school system in the town. So I don't know if I would say best, but I think one of the qualities I think that I would bring to it is I do have a lot of experience in different realms of the educational world. I worked in a high school for a long time. Mm-hmm. I work for the Pcc organization, which is it's an enrichment program that they host at Stonehill College, used to be hosted at Bridgewater State, and I've worked there for a number of years, and I work on the board there as well. So I have experience with boards, I've experience with budgets. The budget at PCC is obviously much less complex and much smaller than the Whitman-Hanson one, but it's still something that I've experienced in terms of giving input and understanding and discussing those things. And I think in general, I think that something that would make me a good candidate for this is that, as I mentioned in my my resume, like I work now primarily as a private tutor, and I think Sean was just asking me what I tutor, and I basically tutor whatever someone needs, and I don't want to sit here and say that I know all this stuff, right? But what I am really good at is I can go to a kid's house. When I leave my house at 4 o'clock to go start working with students, I don't know what I'm going to have to be asked to teach them or help them with that day. And so what I'm actually I've gotten very good at doing this over the last 15 years or 20 years, however long. Is picking up things quickly. So I can, if I show up at a kid's house and they're like, I got a test on the English Reformation tomorrow, I can't tell you that I know everything about the English Reformation, but I will very quickly before the hour's out, and I will make sure the kid knows everything about the English Reformation or about, electric current or about how to find the second derivative. I'm pretty good on my feet. I'm pretty good at looking at things and picking things up quickly. And I think that's something that I think, given the nature of this vacancy, given the nature of this position and how it's someone going to be stepping in mid-flow without really having had, if you're a candidate for this position, you've thought about it for a long time, you've gone through some kind of candidacy where you've talked to people in the town, you have you know what issues you really care about and what issues you really want to put forward, but here you're asking someone to step in kind of, in midstream. I know I watched the school committee meeting that I know that you guys have put together, your subcommittees, your little working groups you work in the summer, and, someone's going to be, I know they said at a point that hopefully they'll pick someone tonight, so you guys that person can start working right away. And I think that that's something that I feel comfortable and feel capable I'd be able to do, because just by the nature of my work, I've gotten very good at being very quick on my feet.
Great. Thank you very much. Chris?
Okay.
First question, thank you for your candidacy. My question really has to do with your experience on boards and committees and things like that. What are some of your, positive experience, some of your negative experiences? What does your role tend to be? How has it maybe changed over the years? Or?
Well, yeah. So I'm currently on 2 boards, and so one is they're both PCC related because I've been involved in that program. I went, when I was a youngster, and I've worked there for the last 18 years. But I'm on the alumni board, which was set up because we wanted to, for those that don't know the program, the people that go there tend to be very fanatical about it, and they love it, and they want to, and it kind of hit a rough patch probably about, maybe like 6 or 7, 8 years ago, and so alumni got together and they wanted to figure out a way to kind of maybe help the program or help send kids to the program. And I was recruited for that. I was brought onto that, and that one, because of the nature of it, because it's all alumni, I served as vice president, I served as president. I've served on a number of the subcommittees, especially the scholarship committee, which I feel very passionately about. So I read through we get hundreds and hundreds of scholarship applications every year for kids who want to go to this program and who have, sometimes really, just tragic and kind of difficult circumstances, and they really need help to be able to go to the program. And my thing is that program meant so much to me, and I've seen it through the hundreds of students I've had since I've been teaching there. How I'm meeting them, so I want to be able to help kids, send kids to that. So, when the scholarship committee, when I joined, I'm like, well, I want to be on the scholarship committee, and I was kind of everyone is equal. We're all alumni. As far as when I was asked to be on the board of the actual PCC Board of Directors, so the Board of Directors is basically the superintendents of the sending districts, including the executive director, who until June 30th was Tom Lynch, who is the now retired superintendent of Berkeley Public Schools, and me. I represent both the alumni and the faculty there. And in that case, I don't feel like I'm, nominally I have a vote, but I don't feel obviously as like that I'm among equals, right? That I feel like I am definitely, these are people who, for their day job handle, budgets of millions of dollars. They, handle staffs of, dozens. And have all of this kind of, responsibility that I don't have as someone who just comes in. So I mean, so in that sense, in that board, I tend to be a lot more of kind of a, just a voice of someone who has been to the program, because most of the superintendents have not. Someone who's worked at the program, and someone that has that perspective that's different, from that board. But I don't feel like I would say that I'm, a co-equal member of that board just because of the nature of the other members. But yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
2 questions.
Okay.
First one's a 3-parter.
All right.
First part, could you describe your understanding of the budget process?
So, I mean, I know that the budget process is, in a lot of ways, the superintendent, has a lot of say in the budgetary process, and the school committee acts as in some ways like a check, as a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like a resource, like a ballast of sorts to, what the school needs. The superintendent obviously knows and understands what his building needs more than maybe the school committee does, because he's in the buildings, he's on the ground. But the school committee represents, his boss, and and also represent the citizens of, in our case, Whitman, and the taxpayers of Whitman, and that they have a responsibility to make sure that while both the idea that the students are being served, but also that the taxpayers are being looked after because of the huge amount of, the large percentage of the town budget and the tax revenue that comes in. A large part of that goes to the schools, and there is a need for there to be a citizen check on the school to make sure that, like I said, both that the children of the town are being served and being provided a best education as they can be, but also that the taxpayers in the town are also being well represented.
Second part, can you name the key events or timeline of the budget?
Well, I know that the school budget, is like, like most things, it goes from a July 1 to a June 30. And I know that a lot of the budget gets worked out starting in, for, the next year for that June when they start, bring it for the towns. At the town meeting, it starts getting worked out usually in the fall. And that they start working on that, and it's an ongoing process throughout the course of the year to have the budget ready so it can be presented to town meeting, usually, in May or June, depending on when the town meetings of the two towns are. And so far, in my experience of living here, I know obviously last year was a little bit different because of the pandemic, but it seems like, despite all of the kind of consternation leading up to it, generally both the towns of Whitman and Hanson, approve, the school budget in such a way that it doesn't require any kind of, I know there's always talk of super town meetings and things like that to make sure if there's a disagreement between the two towns about the budget. But that is my understanding, at least, of how the timeline. I don't know how much more granular it needs to be.
This is all your understanding.
Okay.
And if the request is higher than the town's allotment, there's been that magical 5% increase to the assessment from the prior year. So if the request is higher than the town's allotment of that 5% that they sort of pencil in, what would you do?
Well, I think, if you look at, past situations, it seems like there have been a few times where the Board of Selectmen have worked together to find monies within the town, sometimes one-time monies, but I think the best thing, to do is to try and work with the school system to see, because I think obviously you want to make sure that any budgetary things you do are long-term sustainable, so that if the school comes in with a certain request and we let's shake the couch cushions and see what shakes out, maybe you find that money that year, but then where does it come from the next year? So I think that the idea would be that to work within the school committee and work with the superintendent to try and find a sustainable figure that would work.
And last but not least, question 2, what is your understanding of the charge or responsibility of a school committee member?
Well, I think I spoke a little bit about this, but I think that the school committee member, is, there are however many people there are in Whitman that, whether they have children in the school, whether they don't have children in the school, whether they are very civically engaged, whether they are not, they are stakeholders in this town and they are stakeholders in the school. So I think the responsibility of an individual school committee member is to be a conduit for the people in the town, and to make sure that both, like I said before, both that the children of the town and the children of the district are being educated to the best of our abilities, but also that the people in the town have a voice in the way that their money is spent in the school, and to make sure that there is a check on the school system in such a way that the people of the town feel like they have a voice and that they have they all have a stake in it, but that they all have, that there is a kind of an accountability to from the people of the town to the school.
Thank you.
Next question.
Okay.
I'm going to read this for you. The Education Reform Act of 1993 created Chapter 70 state aid and a funding formula which uses an aggregate model intended to allow every school district to achieve comparable funding levels without overburdening taxpayers. Not applying the Chapter 70 statutory assessment method as it was intended has resulted in our children receiving an education funded at the lowest common denominator of Whitman and Hanson taxpayer funds. At one point, sinking the district per pupil expenditure to an all-time low of 316 out of 323 Massachusetts school districts in 2016. The question is, will you recognize the correction that needs to be made, and please describe how you will help bring Perpetual investment in children's education back in line with the state average?
So I think that's a fascinating question in the sense that you talked about the Education Reform Act, you talked about Chapter 70 and the minimum required contribution of a town. And the idea that, the state sets that, and then the idea is, well, what are we going to do beyond that to get to the level that, like you said, comparable towns in the area are reaching. And so I think that that's something that's a really important discussion, because I think that there is there are two things about that. One is the idea that Whitman in and of itself is it is a small kind of bedroom community, and there isn't a lot of as much economic development as maybe some of the other towns, and that obviously does put a hindrance, I think, on the tax base here. But I do think that there are ways that we can do outreach to the public, and I think that this has been done sometimes as well, when there have been issues that have come up and we've needed money for the schools, that the town has come forward at town meeting and made the sacrifices in terms of tax increases to meet the needs, as maybe as meager as they may be at the time. But I would think that what we would need to do is, and a lot of this is beyond the scope of the school committee, but obviously on a broader scale, the town probably needs to do more, probably to bring in more business to the area to help increase that tax base. But also we need, as a school committee, and I think as just citizens, need to do a good job of explaining the if you think about some of the things that that investing, I think, is a hard concept, I think, for people to get in the sense of the school, where the idea that the money that a town pays for their school is an investment. And I don't think that there is always a sense of an immediate return on that investment, but that there is. It's just not a tangible one, like if you invested your money in the stock market and you get your dividends, you get your money back. But I think that the idea of communicating and trying to communicate to the people of the town that the money that they spend now will pay off for them. The money the increased money that they will spend for the schools will have benefits for them, not just for the children that they may have, but also, I live next to 2 retirees who don't have any kids. So it is like, well, what benefit is it for them to pay more for my kids? And the idea is that, it's on the one hand, you would hope that the idea of community and the idea that we, everybody should pitch in and stuff like that. But I think that there are real, tangible benefits that come from having a school system that is highly desirable. If you invest in your school and that draws people into that school system, I wanted to move to this town because I wanted my kids to go to the schools here. I'd love to be able to do something where, to help it so that other people, when they're looking at places to raise their families, look at Whitman or look at Hanson and look at this school system and say, that's, and the best way to do that is to invest more money in it. And I think that that's something that is a hard sell for people because they don't see that immediate return on investment. But when you think about, a couple years down the road, 10 years down the road, what it will mean for this town to have, a school system that is desirable to young families, to move in and to raise their families here, I think that that's something that you can communicate to the, you know, I mean, my neighbor's very nice, but he's, you know, but the old timers who, you know, who don't have kids in the system and who don't understand, you know, don't really want to pay more for the schools. But the idea that it is, our children are, you know, our most, not just our, meaning our parents, but our community's most valuable asset. And I think the more you invest in them, the more dividends get paid down the road. And I think it would be the job of the stakeholders in the community and the elected officials in this community to really, you know, try to do their best to convey that to the town in a way that, so if there is a need, when there is a need to increase funding, that it's like, but this is what it's going to mean for our town. It's not just an ask. It's not just a, you know, the school wants this, we got to give it to them. It's like, this is why it's important. This is what it will mean for you and your families and for the town itself.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, first, thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. What is a vote that the school committee has taken in recent years that you've been supportive of, and why? And what is a vote that the school committee has taken in recent years that you haven't been supportive of, and why?
Okay. That is a, I mean, you know, you feel like a little bit because you guys are the ones that voted, so you do feel like you don't want to. There's a lot. I would say that I feel like that there's been a lot of things that you guys have voted for in the last few years that I've been supporting. I think that you know, there's been I noticed in the last, you know, I mean, for a number of years, but obviously like in the last few weeks, you guys have been really talking a lot about working towards increasing early childhood education here in town, and I think that's a huge thing. And so I don't know if a future vote is one that would count, but I think that seeing that level of commitment from the school committee towards that, I know you guys, you know, we're all voting on your you know, your priorities for your working groups this summer, and that it seemed like everybody had early childhood education as either their number one or number two choice, and that was heartening to me because I do think as I mentioned in my letter, I felt nothing but, you know, I have nothing but positive things to say about my children's experience here in Whitman, especially when they were in preschool. But I also know that because of the nature of, you know, my children are on IEPs, they were, you know, preschool was provided for them, and it's not provided for everybody. Full day kindergarten is not provided for everybody. And the idea that, you know, seeing how much of a difference it made for my children, I feel like it's something that, you know, is, you know, it's something that it's like, you know, it seems like it's such a no-brainer that we should be doing that for every child in the district, and increasing that, and the idea that, you know, again, going back to the idea of investment, you know, investing early just seems like so much, you know, or not investing earlier seems so, you know, penny wise but pound foolish. You know, that we're, you know, to invest the money earlier when it can make such a, you know, a bigger difference. Just seems so kind of, you know, obvious, but obviously it's something it's been difficult to do in this town. So I think that seeing the commitment that the school committee has to that endeavor, I also think, you know, things around social and emotional development that has been discussed at the school committee, and the emphasis that both the superintendent has put, but also that you as a committee have put, I think is really huge. I think that I don't think that kids are different, but I think that our understanding of, you know, from when I was younger or any time, I mean, I think that, you know, kids are kids, and I think that the understanding that we have now of how important their emotional life is and their emotional development is really something that, you know, coming to understand that now, I think has been, you know, so the idea that investing in that as well, I think is something that I've you know, I've been heartened by to see that you guys have put such an emphasis on that in your recent meetings. As far as one that I don't agree with, that I don't know. I don't know if I mean I don't want to say that I don't. You know, I mean, but there's nothing. I mean, I mean, I will say that there have definitely been. You know, I try to watch as many of the meetings as I can, school committee and selectmen, and I wasn't a fan of the dog bites vote. But in terms of the school committee, there's nothing that jumps out to me in terms of something where I felt that you guys were not. I don't say that you guys, I mean, again, it's tough because you guys are right here and be like, oh, every decision you made is great. But I think that there's nothing that's really jumped out at me as where I thought to myself, I'm like, ooh, if I were on the school committee, I would have gone a different way. I think that it seems like and this is true for both, the Whitman and the Hanson people, and I do like that you all kind of intermingle, so it's not Whitman on one side and, Sharks and Jets kind of thing on either side of the library, that you all intermingle, but it does seem that everybody there has like a pretty singular focus on what is best for the children of our district. And so, like I said, I don't think there's anything I can think of right now. I will be glad to go through the tapes and find out a place you screwed up if you want, but I think that my feeling is that you've all been...
Won't take long.
Okay. But I think you guys have all been excellent stewards of our students, and I think that is one of the reasons why when I saw that there was a vacancy. I'll just say just briefly, I was here at the town meeting in June, and the Environmental Protection Awareness Club was here, and a couple of the students in that club were students of mine at PCC, and they came up and they talked to me, and I was very excited for their initiative and their their drive and their eloquence when they spoke, and I was really proud. And then when I kind of left later that night, I was thinking about it, I was talking about it, I told my wife about it. I'm like, oh, I saw so-and-so and so-and-so. They came up to me, and, oh, they passed the plastic bag ban, and this is great. But that was kind of almost like replaced with a little bit of, my pride in them was a little embarrassment for me, and that I feel like I haven't really, when I mentioned this in my letter, the amount that the town has given my children, I think is something that I can never repay. And I think that when I felt bad because I'm like, these kids who should be like on TikTok or doing something else are trying to make a difference in the town, and I was thinking, like, I don't really do very much. I guess the idea that there's more to being a good neighbor than not playing your music really loud in the summer. And when I saw this, I thought this is maybe something that I could do because of the experience I have, but it isn't coming from a place of I have this burning thing where you guys have been doing stuff and I feel like I want to go in there and shake things up. It's more the idea of I wanted to make sure that if somebody was going to be in there, and obviously, like I said, having some of the people I know out there, some of them I just met tonight, they would all do an excellent job. But I didn't know that when I applied, and I didn't know who was going to apply or if anyone was going to apply. And so the reason I stepped forward was to make sure that somebody was going to be there to be an oarsman for the work you guys are doing, and that, and like I said, when I put my name in, I had no idea whether or not, I guess maybe my neighbor who hates my kids or whatever was just, I'm going to go in there and do this. I wanted to make sure that somebody was here that was going to help you guys do the work that you guys have been doing. And so I guess that's my long-winded way of saying is I don't really have a thing where I look at it and saying, like, I feel like you guys have done a bad job with this or you made a wrong decision. I think that you guys have been excellent stewards for this district, and I just wanted to help.
Thank you.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Well, you've done a wonderful job telling us skills and telling us experiences, and everything you said, you've got some great words there. I want you to think for a moment about, and I don't like to call it weaknesses, but what would Ryan want to work on to improve himself that'll help him be a better member of the school committee?
Well, I mean, one of the things I think that I would say is a weakness right now, and where this is kind of an opportunity to maybe address this to correct this, is that I kind of wait to be called upon. And so, like I said, for the PCC Alumni Board, they came to me and they're like, we need somebody, can you do it? When, I was asked to go be a proctor at PCC, which is basically their camper, the camp counselors who live there in the summer, and I did that. And then the teacher that I interned with was retiring. He's like, do you want to teach my class? And I said, okay. And then they asked me, do you want to teach journalism? I said, sure. They go, do you want to be our member on the board? I'm like, sure. And then I just kind of wait, the idea that waiting around for someone to ask for my help. And I'm very good if you ask me for help. I'm less good at putting myself out there to take a chance. Like, I don't think I would ever have thought to pull papers and run against somebody. I don't think that I would have, and that's why, like I said, my general thing is I'm not someone who is, if I was, I wouldn't want to campaign against one of you because I wouldn't want to say that I would do a better job than one of you. I don't think that that's, I'm not particularly very good at selling myself, I guess, in that regard. And I'm not very good at kind of taking initiative in that way. And so I think this is a step where I felt like watching those kids at the meeting, and I'm like, these kids could be doing anything else on their Wednesday night. And obviously they spent a lot of time before that too. And I mean, it's embarrassing sometimes to me to think about the idea, like, well, I didn't know the kids. And they'd come up and they'd be like, oh, what are you up to? How you doing? How's it going? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just chasing my kids around the yard and doing the same thing. That they had done more than I had. And so this, me doing this is really my way of trying to correct what I think is, I do think is a weakness of mine, which is that I'm quite content to kind of sit around and wait to be asked to step up. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity where I can step up without hurting anyone's feelings, without having to go, knock door to door and introduce myself to people and get them to, sign things and tell them to vote for me and, or stand out with a sign on my, like, that kind of stuff is not something that's really, I'm super comfortable with. I think I've had there are certain skills I've had in my life or I developed in my life that have made a lot of the stuff I do in my life very easy. And I mean, and that's fine and that's great. And other parts of my life, especially with my, my son, are very difficult. But I don't always seek out challenges. And so I thought that this was something that I could do because I do feel an extreme debt to the town for, like I said, I've gone to those every IEP meeting, and they always say I'm their favorite one because I never ask for anything because they just give me everything. They give my kids everything, and I've never had to fight with them. I've never had to ask for anything, and sometimes I ask them, like, hey, what about the other kids? Can you do a little bit less for my kid? And so that's something where I think that I felt really bad about that. Like, I've just been letting this happen and just waiting for someone to come and be like, well, maybe someday someone will come up and ask me to do something. And then I saw this opportunity. I'm like, well, this is something that I have a little bit of experience with, something that I have an interest in, something that is obviously directly correlated to the debt I feel I owe the town. I don't know if I know a lot about zoning or whatever. So, there's other things where I don't have that experience, but I have some limited experience in this, and that made me think that maybe this is some way that I could be of service, because I think that's the key thing for me about this. This is about being of service, and that's something that, like I said, I'm happy to be of service. If you ask me, I'm less likely to seek out service to do, and so that's what I'm attempting to rectify tonight by coming forward and doing this.
Thank you.
Randy. Thank you. And again, thank you for throwing your name in the ring. My question is more budget related.
Okay.
Basically, the way the town's budgets and the school budget seems to work is they're on like a parallel path, really not meeting at all until sometime around April. I say they come to like a collision course, and it gets very chaotic. And if you followed it, you know the process. What would you do to streamline that process?
Well, I think that, and I don't know, again, all of the stuff that happens off camera, outside those meetings, but I think that there being, good communication between the members of the Whitman School Committee, or the Whitman members of the school, it's all one school committee, but the Whitman members of the school committee and the Hanson members of the school committee, and making, and I'm sure this happens, but making sure that there would be, communication so that there is a sense that the people in each town know what is going on as the process is going forward, because it does seem like it gets to, like you said, that April, May time, and all of a sudden everyone starts paying attention. And the idea of, making sure that as representatives of both the school district, but mainly our towns, that we are communicating back to the citizens what the process is, so it's not like it's always, if you think about, like, if you have like a contractor come to your house, you always like when they update you, or I bring my car to Mike's Auto and they call me up and they let me know, like, okay, well, this is what's going on now, as opposed opposed to just me showing up the next day and they're like, this is what we did and this is what you owe. And I think it's always the idea of that sticker shock and the idea that if you can keep the members of the community as best informed of the process as you can as you go forward, there might be less of that sticker shock that happens and a more understanding of like how the budget got to the point that it got to, and that there's more of an understanding, because I think, again, like I said, it's like if you bring your car in and you just show up and you thought I just needed new rotors and like actually needed all this other stuff, but here's your bill, and you weren't expecting it, you can kind of, whereas if they keep you informed as you work through the process, there might be less kind of consternation when that time comes. Right, usually it's right before the town meetings too, and there's obviously a lot of kind of again, sticker shock and not really understanding how the school arrived at these numbers. And so I think doing a good job of communicating and keeping the public informed throughout the whole process and not just right before the warrant is issued, I think might be a way to help with that.
Justin. Thank you. Chris is going to pass you a sheet. You touched briefly on what the school committee's been working on the last couple of weeks. They're working to develop. They're building out working groups on key areas of focus, and at the last meeting, the 9 current members of the school committee got to vote their top 3 priorities each. I just wanted to give you the same opportunity that they just had. From the list they've developed, what are your top 3 priorities?
Well, obviously we talked about early childhood education. That's a key one. I do think that the network of care and comfort for all students and families, I think that is really key. And I think that, and like I said, my experience has been wonderful with that, but I feel like the idea of and this has been true forever. This isn't just, like I said, I think, but there's more of an understanding of the, the emotional toll that children go through, that families go through, and I think of having an understanding of there being a connection between the schools and the families, and not just in terms of academic performance, but also just the overall kind of the whole of the student, I think, is really key. And I think that the early college initiative was something that I was really, obviously it was not one of the ones that was selected, but I think that it was something that is, really the idea of kind of working with students early on to kind of develop a plan. My kids have IEPs, and almost the idea of not like a formal IEP, but the idea of like that individualized education plan for all students, and the idea of that each student has somebody that is a touchstone that's looking out for them, that's helping them chart their course. Because obviously some families come from, my parents were, both educated. My father was a college professor, my mother was a high school teacher. I knew about college. I knew what I was, I knew there was a thing I had to do. I knew it was a place I was going to go. I didn't really have to think about it very much because it was just expected that I was going to do that. And that's obviously not the case for all families. And that, and there's some, families that I work with who have their first kid who's going to college, and they're asking me questions about like, okay, what SAT, ACT, how many schools did they apply to? All these questions that they picked up from like reading a Newsweek one time or something. And the idea of having some kind of program at the school that helps students and families kind of, plan for college at an earlier point in their path, I think would be something that would be a really worthwhile thing to invest in.
Thank you.
Okay. Dan.
Okay, I have a few questions. If you're chosen tonight, do you plan on running at the end of the year?
I would say this, is that if I think I'm doing a good job, I would.
Okay. What's the most important reason that convinced you to put your name into the running today?
Well, I think I talked about that. I think it is the idea of service and giving back to the community. I think that's something that I do feel very strongly about, and I really do, and I know this sounds, I have no complaints about, and nothing but praise for the work that the people at the McQuan, at the preschool, the preschool academy, at the Duval and the Conley, my kids have been to all 4, have done. And the idea, and just hearing, in town, the idea that not everybody has the same experience that I've had made me want to come in and be like, what can I do to help so that everybody has as positive experience with their students as I've had with the school district in mind.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any conflict of interest that would cause you to abstain from voting on any issue that came before the board?
I don't believe so. I don't think so. I mean, I know my children are in the district, but again, I'm not coming at this from a point of view of, I don't have a combative relationship with the schools and my children. I've had a very positive one, so I don't think that I would.
And I think you've already answered this. My other question was, why haven't you run in the past for school committee? But
I think it's that is, like I said, I tend to keep my head down a little bit.
Right. And
so.
what would you think makes you our number one choice to be chosen? What puts you in the top running?
Well, I mean, like I said, I would hasten. I wouldn't want to rush to say that I'm anyone's number one choice. I think what would make me a good choice is the reasons I've outlined so far, which is that the limited experience I've had so far, coupled with, I think, my ability and my desire to learn how to work on a school committee and how to work with the members of the school committee, to work with the administration, to really make, like I said, a school system that is as equitable to all students as it can be.
Thank you.
Thank you for applying. We have difficulties in this town sometimes filling boards and committees, and to see such a great group of people come out for this was very encouraging, and for that I thank you very much. The next part of my questioning is a formal request for help from you. I have a ton of yard work.
Okay.
And you need to be asked. I'm asking.
Okay, all right, yeah. Well, I think my lawnmower just broke, so you will need to. I'll need to use yours.
I'm just joking. Okay. But with all the news and radio and TV and everything, we're being bombarded with this critical race theory out in the news, and it's maddening sometimes. I do a lot of driving. I shut the radio off sometimes. It's just crazy. So as a school committee member, I just would like a brief idea of how you would react to if that proposal came before the school committee.
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but as I understand it, critical race theory is really more of something that is taught at a college level, not at something that would be at a K through 12. And so I think that there's a lot of, it's certainly something that gets talked a lot about, and it's been talked a lot about recently. And I like I said, my understanding of it is that it's really much more something that is taught at is taught in at the college and secondary level, not at the high school level, or even certainly not the elementary or the middle school level. I guess I would say that I think any kind of if there was and I'm sure there is. I know, one of the nice things one of the only nice things I think about the hybrid learning that we had this year was I got to witness my daughter's classes as, when she was home doing that in the way that I don't know how it went for everybody else, but I was, my daughter's social studies teacher, she's in first grade, it was her first time ever teaching a class, and I thought to myself, oh my God, she's doing it and everybody is watching her, right? Like, it's not just it's not like, 18 6-year-olds, it's 18 6-year-olds and their grandparents and their mothers and their fathers who are in the kitchen or whatever. And I think that the way that they dealt with issues around, equality, around kind of some of the more, the more, difficult issues, I guess I would say, around, like I said, equality and around kind of discrimination. I was very heartened by how deftly they handle it for first graders. And I think that any kind of, curriculum that does put an emphasis on the idea of, equality among races, among, genders, among sexual orientations, I think is something that's definitely worthwhile and needs to be part of it, because I think that there are when you see these, my kids, and you realize that, like, they know nothing. They come out, they know nothing. And the idea that, somewhere along the line, they don't learn everything from you. They learn things from other places. They learn things from things they see on the internet. They learn from things they hear from peers. They learn from things they hear, on YouTube or wherever. And they also learn things in school. And I think that anything the school can do to kind of be a countervailing force to some of the more discriminatory things that you see out there, I think is a really valuable thing. So I would support any curriculum that emphasized the idea of equality and the idea of that, and that also was as honest as could be, depending on the and I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Age appropriate. That did talk about some of the more thorny issues of our history. But as far as I understand it, critical race theory is not something I think that would be appropriate for, and not because of the nature of the content, but I think because of the complexity of it. And like I said, it seems like it's something that is really taught more in higher ed than in primary. So that would be my basic understanding of it.
I appreciate your honesty. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I wish I had known I could have wore shorts. When I saw you come in, I'm like, oh man, it's hot out there. Someone's got the right idea. Thank you guys very much. I do appreciate it. I know it's late.
Count on me.
Yeah. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to all of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Need that sheet back?
Oh, yeah.
Make 6 copies?
Well, it's a long story.
We got a budget to take care of. Yeah, 1 copy, that's it.
Make sure you made 6 copies.
I do have 6 copies.
Oh, you do?
Oh, man. They could have gone home and had some homework.
After he took back the first one, I didn't want to ruin the whole meeting.
He's wishing I held back a little bit and waited.
Website's open libraries.
Queen's Bob.
Down a little?
Hello.
Open the window, I think.
Hey, Chris.
What's the tempo?
I was going to say roasted.
Me too.
Roasted.
Cooler than in here.
Are we ready?
Your name and
Name, rank, and serial number.
Is it raining out?
Greetings, Bob.
I think it was.
Bob, we've read your materials,
Okay.
and we know what you bring and what you think of the job. You did the job for 12 years. Could you? I get to ask you the first question, then the people in the school committee will be asking questions, and then the selectmen, and then after that, we're going to cast votes.
Okay.
And hopefully someone will make 6 of them, and you're perfectly free to come back and watch us do that, if you'd like to do that.
Sure.
My question for you is it's a typical opening question. Could you please tell us why you think you are the person that we should be choosing for this job?
Right. I understand that that was one of the requirements, and due to circumstances, I didn't really get it done on time, but I do have it here. If I could read it first, would you accept that as a...
Be my guest.
Okay. I believe my 12 years' experience on the school committee will offer a seamless transition to the current committee. I have a solid understanding of how things work and would be a valuable resource. I understand the budget process and how critical it is to formulating what the priorities need to be. I'd be able to engage in the current discussions and assess what steps should be taken. There are still several members on the board that I work with, and this would create an instant dialogue and would be able to work together for the benefit of the students and the community. I come with no agenda, and I'm interested in only filling this one-year vacancy.
Okay. Thank you very much.
First,
turn it over to Chris.
Thanks for coming, throwing your hat in the ring, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
My question it has to do with some other committees or boards you've been on, how you typically find your place in those, some of your positive experiences, some of your challenges.
I think what's important is that when you are assigned to a committee, is that you have to be able to feel out how others feel. In other words, you shouldn't be dominating that particular committee, but if you have anything important to add,
or to help out and to let your views be known, that would be helpful. As far as positive experiences, I think a couple of things that we did, excuse me, we tried to formulate a budget subcommittee for a number of years, and unfortunately didn't work out the way that we thought it would. There were two of us on the committee at the time, and we had two town representatives, but the dialogue never seemed to get to the point to where it was. So that was probably one of the most frustrating things. And I guess the other thing would be all-day kindergarten, which I had advocated for a number of years when I was on the committee, but it came to a budget situation, and it always got sort of left by the wayside. So I think you just need to listen to other people and understand what their views are, and you just have to go along with it, or you have to say, listen, I disagree, but I think maybe we should try this in a collegial way, not to take over.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Fred.
I have two questions. The first one's a three-part question, and we have a separate one.
Okay.
Could you describe your understanding of the budget process?
Okay, through my experience of the budget process, I kind of lived through three different financial people. And at one point, of course, it was the balance of students, then it became the statutory. I think the budget process within itself is something that I think, for me, I would depend upon the financial advisor to present, and then I would look at that and try to see what priorities would fit in with those. I know there's always sort of a cap that we try to stay in. So the formulation of that I would leave up to the financial people, and then obviously work from there.
Can you name the key events or the timeline of the budget process?
Generally, it started probably, I think, if I remember, around December. So December, January, February, March. March, it got a little tight. April, May, we had to make a decision as far as the budget itself. This is the amount of money we want to work with, and then there's always the discussion whether once we set the budget, we can't go any higher, but we can go lower, and I know that's been sort of a controversy as to whether that's true or not, but in the way I've always worked at it, and always I was told that's the way it worked. And then you would have the discussion with the representatives from the Finance Committee. You'd meet with them several times. Then you have an open session and discuss and come up with an assessment that we think would work within the town. And I know a lot of times that we try to go a little bit higher than what we wanted to do. I know you and I and Steve at some time, and Chris, we went for maybe like a 4 or 5% to try and raise things and end up with maybe 3.5% or 2%. But the process probably starts, I would say probably December, but personally, I think the budget process should start probably around when school starts in September, and then start to formulate what you need to do.
If the request is higher than the town's allotment, which has sort of recently been stated from the 5% increase to the prior year's assessment, what would you do?
Well, I've always maintained that, in past experiences, that I've tried to figure out what is the best for the students, because that's the charge of the school committee, I believe. And you have to look out for the students. Now, the community obviously is important as well, because they're the ones who are paying the bill. But to me, the charge of the school committee, one of the most important things is to provide everything necessary for a student to be successful, regardless of whether they're a special needs person or not. I mean, you've got to really look at the picture and do that. So I would tend to stay with the higher percentage as long as I could.
And I don't know, you keep referencing a question or two ahead of me, but
okay.
Peek on your way in.
No.
What is your understanding of the charge or responsibility of a school committee member?
Yeah, well, like I said, to me, first and foremost, is the student to provide whatever they need. Curriculum. I've been an advocate for foreign language in middle, to expand the middle school, maybe even get into the elementary school. Full-day kindergarten's another issue. There's just so much that comes up, and you can only fit so much into that budget. But to me, primarily, it would be what's best for the students.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, how you doing?
Thank you again for participating.
You're welcome.
The Education Reform Act of 1993 created Chapter 70 state aid and a funding formula, which uses an aggregate model intended to allow every school district to achieve comparable funding levels without overburdening taxpayers. Not applying the Chapter 70 statutory assessment method as it was intended has resulted in our children receiving an education funded at the lowest common denominator of Whitman and Hanson taxpayer funds. At one point, sinking the district per pupil expenditure to an all-time low of 316 out of 323 Mass school districts in 2016. My question is, will you recognize the correction that needs to be made, and please describe how you will help bring perpetual investment in children's education back in line with the state average?
Well, it's quite a lengthy question there. I guess to me what it boils down to is what can the town actually afford. I understand the Chapter 70 formula, and that's been looked at for a long time. It might not be equitable to a lot of towns in the area. Obviously, we know that through my experience and people sitting here is that Whitman usually doesn't seem to get what it needs from that Chapter 70, although they say we do get better than average. But I think what happens is it comes down to what the town can afford. I mean, we can all think of what we would like to do, but as I answered Fred's question is that what can the town provide? What's the best they can do? And as far as the funding goes, I think you probably have to petition the legislature to make sure that the schools get funded properly. Whether you have to call the state senator or whatever to make sure that the state provides what it's supposed to provide for. And as people know here, that's another thing is that I always get upset about is the state just doesn't fulfill its obligations. We talk about unfunded mandates that you're all aware of that we have to have, and usually there's people who are above us that making those decisions but don't understand what the impact is on the entire community and the school system. So I think that's a legislative issue. Welcome.
What is a vote that the school committee has taken in recent years that you've been supportive of, and why? And what is a vote the school committee has taken in recent years that you haven't been supportive of, and why?
Got to think about that. Well, I think at one time during the budget process, I was one of two people that stayed at the higher assessment level when it came to the budget. I think I was at 4%, and I think the committee was at 2%. So I stayed for the 4%. I don't recall many issues where I voted against. I can't recall anything that I would say would be a negative vote on my part. That was an important vote. I mean, there are a couple of silly ones, but nothing that I can recall. Usually, I'm pretty supportive of what the budget process is, and the policies that go along with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good. You've told us, and I know you probably could even go further about all of your experiences, your assets, the wonderful talent. I've interviewed you once already for a position at the JFK Library, and I'm going a little bit beyond, so I won't go too far.
Okay.
What's the one thing you probably, Bob Trotter could improve upon or would improve upon if he was a school committee member again? Not a weakness, but...
Yeah, I
improve upon.
I think to improve upon, I think the budget is something that is a very complicated issue. I understand it, but maybe that's one area I could get into a little bit more than I have in the past. Other than that, I mean, I understand how a school runs. I mean, that's my background. I know a lot about the teacher unions, and I did a lot of negotiations. I was on the policy committee and several other committees. So I think probably the thing that I could improve upon the most might be the actual budget process. But I think when you build a committee, I think you have people that kind of have maybe interests or specialties, so that someone who isn't quite as good at the budget might be very good at another issue. So that's why I think a committee is formed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Randy. Thanks, Bob.
Yep.
Mine is a budget-related question.
Okay.
Obviously, through your experience, it's, we kind of see the budgets, they almost run like a parallel path. We have the town developing its ability to pay and the superintendent's requests. And then sometime in April, they meet, things get chaotic. And,
very chaotic.
Then we have a month of chaos. What would you do to streamline that process?
I think what's important, and I've stated this before, is I think that subcommittee, I think there should be a school committee subcommittee that meets with the town side to kind of look at the budget to say, okay, this is what we're looking for, and the school says this is what we're looking for, and to try and understand each other's thinking in order to resolve an issue such as that. They might not always agree, but I think it's important to get that done prior to those April meetings or those May meetings when everything comes down to the final second and you have to take a vote and nothing has really been discussed enough, as far as my opinion. But
thank you.
I mean, that's what I would do.
Chris is going to pass you a handout.
Keep this one?
You can keep this one. At the last couple of school committee meetings, committee members had gotten together to develop sort of areas of focus for working groups over the summer. And at the last meeting, the 9 current members of the committee were all voted their top 3 priorities from this list that they developed. So I just wanted to give you the same opportunity. From these areas of focus, what are your top 3 priorities?
Okay. Do I see all-day kindergarten on this?
That top one, yeah.
The top one. Okay. Well, I said early childhood, K, pre-K. But I don't know if that was. That would be my number. That would be number 1 for me. Probably the related arts. I think foreign language is important. There's quite a few I'd rate, like 3, 4, 5, but I think infrastructure would be important. That seems to be something that's going to progress as we go along. I think all the others are just as important, and it's hard to kind of rate the remaining ones, but right. I think those are the 3 that I would go for.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, my turn. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
If you were chosen tonight, would you plan on running when re-election time comes?
Probably not.
Probably not?
Yeah, I'll be truthful with you. Initially, I thought this was just going to be a simple 1-year appointment. I did do 12 years, and I got out figuring to give someone else an opportunity, but I just figured to fill in the 1 year where they needed someone, I think that my qualifications would certainly help to finish out the year and then give someone the opportunity to run. So.
Well, I guess you just answered my second question, is what was the most important reason to convince you to put your name in for the running, and you just answered that.
Yes, I thought it would be important for someone who, with my background, would be able to help the current committee and then, to get through what they need to get through.
Do you feel as though you have any conflict of interest that would cause you to abstain from voting on any issues that would come before the board, your committee?
No.
And obviously, why haven't you run in the past for school committee?
Well, I did 12 years.
You've done 12 years.
I did 12 years, and I thought that was, time to get out and let someone else get a chance. And I didn't want to be too old sitting at the table.
He's calling us old, Carl.
No, I'm about there.
Yeah.
Truth hurts.
And that's good. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
I mean, I still follow it. I understand what's going on and so forth. It's just that, after 12 years, it was...
Okay, thank you.
Bob, thanks for throwing your hat in the ring. I appreciate it. As you know, it's very hard to get people to come forth for volunteer for boards and committees. It's tough, very tough. So I appreciate you coming forth. And I would like to officially, from my family to you, as my condolences.
Thank you.
And with all the news today, the radio, TV, we're bombarded with this critical race theory, maddening. I would just like briefly for you to touch upon that as a school committee member. If that came before the board, what would you think about that?
I think it's important to understand that there are differences among people. We need to understand those differences. Each of us is very different from one another. Each of us have different ideas about things. So, and I think that's how you build a consensus, is if you are all-encompassing of everybody, and you understand the past, which can help you to the future, and you might be able to understand someone's struggles and how they feel they fit in society. So I think something like that is important. I think that's something that we hopefully learn at home. The school sometimes has a lot on its agenda to teach, but I think something like that would be important in the sense of to understand other peoples, other races, and so forth.
I appreciate your honesty, and once again, I want to thank you for all your past service to the town of Whitman. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions of us, Bob?
No, I think I'm
Think you're good?
I think I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Oh, do you want to bring
Would you like this back?
Miss Clough in?
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I had to seen this already.
Hang on. There you go. You get it back. You can frame it now.
Fingerprints on that one.
Where were they going to have that firefighters thing?
VFW. At the VFW, I think?
Oh, VFW.
Maybe, yeah.
You didn't go there?
Yeah, it's kind of late now.
Probably over.
Maybe, yeah.
Welcome back, Kelly.
Hello.
Hi, Heather.
Welcome back.
We just have one little bit of unfinished business with you,
No, I don't know the winning lottery numbers, sorry.
and I don't see any ice cream from...
Yeah, if I had known, I would have gotten some. Could have ordered DoorDash while we were waiting.
The other candidates are asked a question from Randy LaMartina. He thought that Fred had already asked something similar to you, so he passed his time. But in order for this process to be totally fair, we thought we'd give you a chance to respond to Randy's question.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Fred actually took mine, and then I developed one for the next candidate after.
That makes sense.
My question basically is, in the budget-related question, the way I see it is the budget's almost run a parallel course, whereas the town is developing its ability to pay to the superintendent's requests. And then it seems like last minute, sometime in April, it's a chaotic collision. And then we go to town meeting. What would you do to try and streamline that process?
I would say probably meet earlier about the budget, talking about proposals sooner. So that way, if there's no last minute throw stuff in there, there's less because it got brought up. You know, even if it's brought up as, hey, what do you guys think of this? It's not a completely new concept trying to finagle into something. It's like, oh, well, I have this idea. It might cost this much. Okay, we'll keep it in the back of our minds. And it would be more fair to include from the beginning, you know, hey, we heard about this program, it's interesting, what about, can we make this work? And if from there you go, okay, I'm going to keep it in our mind, it's probably not going to happen, but looking around going, hey, wait, if we do this, you'll have more of an opportunity if you start sooner with submitting ideas and such.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Awesome.
We can,
Get everybody
the
else.
other people can come back in and
Thank you for that.
we'll continue.
Are there any like ground rules, like you go one pass and do people get dropped, or how does it work?
That's what I think we agreed on the last time.
Yeah.
So you want me to make a motion that we put all names?
I will ask for that when the time comes, Dan.
Well,
Dan, can you tell us why you're the guy to make the motion?
Well, welcome back, folks. Well, we've just sat through 2.5 hours of interviews from 6 candidates. It was a good night. It was a good night for Whitman to know that 6 people of this caliber and this commitment and this knowledge came forward and wanted to fill this seat that's vacant until next year. It's now time to have a vote, and what we're going to do is I'm going to ask for a motion to Dan. I will ask for a motion to put all of the names in nomination, and then we'll go around the table and see what happens. After a round of votes, if someone does not receive 6 votes, which is the necessary qualification here, we will drop the bottom person, one that received the least votes. We'll vote again, and we'll see where that takes us. And hopefully, by the time this is over, we'll have somebody that will be able to serve the rest of Mr. Cullity's term.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we put all 6 applicants' names in the voting list.
Second.
I don't think Fred can.
Can I second this motion?
What?
On a joint?
In a joint? Sure.
Why can't he?
Yeah. I don't know if it was a selectman motion or.
There are guys. Yeah.
All right.
There are people. We've all been doing this together. It's
We're going to go up by one more.
It's the committee of 10.
All right.
We're all part of it. Okay, so we will. I'll accept nominations. We'll start on this side of the table. We'll go around. Although I will. Oh, would you like to start, Chris?
No, I just had a clarification question. You're accepting votes? Is
I'm
everyone
accepting well, yeah, they've all been nominated. I'm accepting votes. I vote for so-and-so. Okay, I'm sorry. I misspoke.
I vote for Mr. Trotter.
And somebody's going to be keeping track. Okay, Mr. Trotter, did you say?
Yes.
Yes.
I vote for Heather Clough.
Okay.
Heather Clough.
Beth Stafford.
I'll go with Beth Stafford.
I'll go with Mr. Trotter.
I'll vote Beth Stafford.
Beth Stafford.
Beth Stafford.
Bob Trotter.
Okay. And
we have 5 Beth Stafford, 3 Bob Trotta, 2 Heather Clough.
okay, so
Imagine.
okay, we'll go with those 3 then. Right. We'll vote again and voting for those 3 because the other people didn't receive votes. Is that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go this way this time.
Then Bob Trotter.
Beth Stafford.
Beth Stafford.
Beth Stafford.
Bob Trotter.
Stafford.
Beth Stafford.
Heather Clough.
Heather
She's
Clough.
she's no longer eligible.
We did keep her in it. We dropped the 3 not receiving votes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Revoted.
Sorry.
Beth Stafford.
Okay, I'm sorry, David.
Oh, Heather Clough.
Heather Clough.
Yeah.
Okay, where does it go now?
Steve, did you change your vote to Beth Stafford?
I did.
Okay. That's 6.
So Beth Stafford got 6.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Beth.
speech.
Thank you, and let me tell you that to have people who are so interested and have this many people for this, to do this, and to have to do what we had to do to come out here. We were talking about this with the resumes and the interviews, and have people, a couple of us had to change around vacation plans too to do this. I think that speaks well for the town and everybody, and I give great respect to everybody here, and I will work for all you guys, and call me up and tell me what you need. And I will do the best of my ability to work with you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank everybody else.
Thank you
Yeah,
all.
you all were fantastic, and I think there's probably plenty of openings on other boards if anyone has interest.
Off the top of my head, Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, I think there's an alternate in the Recreation Commission, and Community Preservation Committee. So, plenty of opportunities.
Our business is exhausted. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
All those in favor?
I guess we're all...